What if the worst day of your life was actually the doorway to everything you were meant to have? The moment Eliza Harper watched her brother-in-law torch the deed to her farm and throw her daughters into the Texas dust, she thought she'd reached the end. Cast out with nothing but $2 and 3 starving children, she began walking a road that seemed to lead nowhere. Then, 80 yards down that godforsaken path, a scream shattered the silence. A stranger lay dying beneath a fallen horse. She could have kept walking. She didn't. And that single choice changed absolutely everything. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey travels. The morning Thomas Harper was buried, his brother Richard smiled at the funeral. Eliza noticed. She stood in her black dress with her 3 daughters pressed against her skirts. Margaret, 9 years old with her father's serious eyes, Lily, 7, clutching a wilted dandelion, and little Rose, barely 4, who kept asking in a whisper when Daddy would wake up. The Texas heat bore down on the small cemetery outside Copper Hollow like a punishment, and Eliza felt every eye in that sparse gathering watching her, waiting to see if the widow would break. She didn't break. Not there. Not in front of them. Richard Harper stood across the grave in a suit too fine for a man who supposedly worked a failing cattle station 60 miles east. His hat was new, his boots were polished, and when the preacher closed his Bible and the handful of neighbors began to drift away, Richard's smile widened just enough for Eliza to see. "We need to talk about the property," he said, his voice low and smooth as oil on water. Eliza's hands tightened on Rose's shoulders. "Not today." "Afraid it can't wait." Richard pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "Thomas made provisions, recent provisions." Margaret looked up at her mother, confused. Lily had gone very still. "Thomas told me everything was settled," Eliza said carefully. "The farm goes to me and the girls. He had it drawn up legal 2 years ago when Rose was born." "That's what I thought too." Richard unfolded the paper with theatrical slowness. "Until I found this in his desk drawer last week. Dated 3 months ago, witnessed and notarized proper." Eliza's heart began to hammer. "Let me see that." Richard held it just out of reach. "Says here that in the event of his death, the property transfers to me as senior male heir. Says you get a small monthly stipend, generous, really, and housing in the old foreman's cottage for as long as you remain unmarried and of good moral character." The words hit her like cold water. "That's a lie." "It's right here in black and white, Eliza. His signature. 2 witnesses I'm sure you'll recognize, both deacons at the church." Richard's eyes glittered. "Now, I'm a reasonable man. I know you're grieving. I'm willing to give you a week to move your things into the cottage, the main house. Well, I'll be needing that for when I bring my own family out from Austin." Thomas was sick at the end, you know that. Fevered, confused. Richard leaned closer, and Eliza smelled whiskey beneath the pomade. "He told me he was worried about you managing alone, worried you'd lose everything without a man's hand on the tiller. This way, the land stays in the family. The Harper name means something in Copper Hollow. You'll be taken care of." "You forged this." Eliza's voice came out steady, cold. "You forged my husband's name." Richard's face hardened. "Careful with accusations like that, sister. Grief makes women say wild things, but there's limits to what folk will tolerate. You've got no proof of anything except what's written legal and proper on this document." He refolded the paper and tucked it away. "1 week, Eliza. After that, I'll expect you settled in the cottage or moved on entirely. Your choice." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Eliza standing in the cemetery with her daughters and the fresh-turned earth of her husband's grave. That night, Eliza tore the house apart looking for Thomas's copy of the will. She found nothing. Either Richard had already taken it, or Thomas had kept it somewhere she didn't know, and now would never know. The 2 deacons who'd supposedly witnessed Richard's document were men she recognized, men she'd served coffee to after church services, men who'd stood at this very funeral and offered their condolences with sad eyes and soft voices, men who could be bought, she realized, or threatened, or convinced that a widow with 3 young daughters was a burden the town didn't need. By lamplight, she counted what money they had. $43 in the kitchen jar, another $16 in the small purse Thomas had given her last Christmas. The livestock had been sold off during his illness to pay the doctor. The fields had gone to seed without his hands to work them. The house itself was in need of repair. A roof that leaked in 2 places, shutters hanging crooked, floorboards that groaned underfoot. Still, it was hers. It was her children's birthright. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, too old not to understand what was happening. "Mama, are we going to have to leave?" "No, baby, we're going to fight this." But fighting required money she didn't have and lawyers she couldn't afford. 3 days after the funeral, Eliza rode into Copper Hollow to speak with Judge Morrison, the only legal authority within 50 miles. She found him in his office above the general store, a man in his 60s with tufted white eyebrows and liver-spotted hands. He listened to her story, read Richard's document, shook his head slowly. "Mrs. Harper, I sympathize with your position, I truly do. But this appears to be in order. Signature matches Thomas's hand, near as I can tell. Witnesses are respectable men. And the law on property transfer between male heirs is, well, it favors the continuation of the family line through men. My daughters are his family line. In spirit, yes. In law?" He spread his hands helplessly. "Texas doesn't make it easy for widows, I'm afraid, especially not with evidence like this. The evidence is forged. Can you prove it?" The question hung in the air. Eliza had nothing. No witnesses, no alternate will, no documentation that contradicted Richard's claim. Just her word against a legal document, and in 1887 Texas, a widow's word counted for very little. "I didn't think so," Judge Morrison said gently. "My advice? Accept your brother-in-law's offer. The cottage isn't much, but it's shelter. The stipend he's proposing is actually quite fair, more than most women in your position could expect. I don't want charity from the man who stole my home." "Then what do you want, Mrs. Harper?" Eliza met his eyes. "Justice." The judge sighed. "Justice and law aren't always the same thing. You're young yet, attractive, if you'll forgive an old man's observation. You'll marry again. A good man would take you and the girls, give you security. Sometimes accepting what we can't change is its own kind of strength." She left his office with her hands shaking and her vision blurred with fury. On the street outside, she nearly collided with Richard himself, who was emerging from the land office with a satisfied expression. "Eliza, didn't expect to see you in town. Come to your senses about the cottage?" "Go to hell." His smile never wavered. "That's unchristian language, sister. What would Thomas think?" "Thomas would have killed you for this." "But Thomas is dead." Richard adjusted his hat. "And I'm here. Facts of life, Eliza. The sooner you accept them, the easier this will be for everyone. Especially those little girls of yours. Wouldn't want them to suffer because their mama's too proud to see reason." The threat in his words was unmistakable. Eliza's hands curled into fists at her sides, but she forced herself to turn and walk away. Behind her, she heard Richard's low chuckle. She had 4 days left when everything fell apart completely. It started with Rose. The little girl woke in the night crying, her forehead burning with fever. By morning she was worse, shivering and mumbling, her skin flushed and hot to the touch. Eliza tried every remedy she knew, cool cloths, willow bark tea, prayers whispered over the small body. Nothing worked. Dr. Brennan came at noon, examined Rose, and gave Eliza the news she'd been dreading. "Scarlet fever, early stages yet, but it needs to be watched close. I'll leave some medicine, but I have to tell you straight, this kind of fever, with a child this young." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "How much for the medicine?" $10, and I'll need to check on her daily until the fever breaks. That's another $1 per visit." Eliza did the math in her head. Between the medicine and the visits, she'd be broke in less than a week. "Do what you need to do." "Doctor." Brennan left the medicine and his instructions. For 2 days, Eliza barely slept, sponging Rose's fevered skin and coaxing her to sip water. Margaret and Lily watched wide-eyed from the doorway, too frightened to ask the questions written on their faces. On the 3rd day, Richard came back. He didn't knock, just opened the front door and walked in like he owned the place, which, legally, he did. Eliza met him in the hallway, exhausted and furious. "Get out! Heard your youngest is sick, wanted to check on my niece. She's fine. Leave." Richard looked past her toward the bedroom where Rose lay sleeping fitfully. Scarlet fever, I heard. That's serious business. Expensive business. He pulled out his pocket watch, checked the time. Your week's up tomorrow, Eliza. I've been patient, but patience has limits. I need more time. Rose can't be moved like this. Then leave her here. I'll see she gets proper care while you and the other girls get settled in the cottage. Eliza's blood ran cold. You're not separating me from my daughter. I'm offering you a solution to an impossible situation. Richard's voice took on a reasonable tone that made her skin crawl. You can't afford to keep her sick and pay for lodging elsewhere. Leave her in the house with a nurse I'll hire. Visit whenever you like. Once she's recovered, we'll reassess. No. Then you've got until noon tomorrow to be out completely. All of you. And I mean completely. No furniture, no food stores, no livestock, nothing that belongs to this property. That furniture was my mother's, and now it's mine. According to the will, remember? Richard smiled. Noon tomorrow, Eliza. After that, I'll have the sheriff remove you if necessary. He left her standing in the hallway, trembling with rage and terror. That night, Eliza sat at Rose's bedside and made an impossible decision. She couldn't fight Richard. Not without money, not without legal standing, not without time. The cottage he'd offered was a trap. She knew that instinctively. Once she accepted it, she'd be under his control forever, dependent on his generosity and subject to his whims. But she had 3 daughters to protect. And right now, Rose needed medicine and care more than Eliza needed pride. So she began to pack. Margaret helped silently, her young face set in grim lines. Lily cried as she wrapped her few belongings in a shawl. Eliza worked mechanically, choosing only what they could carry: clothes, blankets, a few cooking implements, the small Bible that had been Thomas's. She left everything else: the furniture her mother had brought from Georgia, the dishes from her wedding, the photographs of Thomas in his good suit. All of it. Gone. By dawn, they were ready. Rose was still feverish but conscious enough to be carried. Eliza wrapped her in the best blanket they had, then surveyed what remained of their possessions. 2 canvas bags, a cooking pot, and $59, all that was left after paying Dr. Brennan. She'd asked around town about the cottage Richard had mentioned. Finally got directions from Mrs. Yates at the general store. 8 miles north along the old cattle road past the dried-up creek bed, set back in a stand of scrub oak. Hasn't been lived in for years, Mrs. Yates had said carefully. Roof's probably gone bad. Windows broken. But I suppose with some work. Eliza didn't have the heart to tell her there would be no work, no repairs, no settling in. Because the moment she'd asked for those directions, she'd made a different decision entirely. She wasn't going to the cottage. She was leaving Copper Hollow altogether. They left at sunrise, walking north along the main road. Margaret carried 1 bag, Eliza carried Rose and the other bag, and Lily held tight to her sister's hand. The Texas sky was already bleaching white with heat, promising another brutal day. Where are we going, Mama? Lily asked after the first mile. Somewhere better. But where? Eliza didn't have an answer. She had $2 left after settling with Dr. Brennan that morning. She'd left the rest of the money hidden in the house, a bitter decision she'd agonized over. But Richard would search their bags. She knew he would. Better to hide most of it where she might retrieve it later somehow than lose it all immediately. $2. 3 daughters. And no plan beyond putting distance between themselves and Richard Harper. They walked through the morning, stopping only when Rose needed water or when Eliza's arms couldn't hold her any longer. The road stretched endlessly ahead, shimmering in the heat. No wagons passed, no riders, nothing but dust and sun, and the slow, terrible realization that Eliza had no idea what she was doing. By noon, they'd covered maybe 5 miles. Margaret's face was bright red with sunburn. Lily had stopped talking entirely, just trudging forward with her head down. Rose drifted in and out of fevered sleep, her small body limp in Eliza's arms. "Mama, I'm thirsty," Lily whispered. They'd finished their water an hour ago. Eliza scanned the landscape desperately, looking for any sign of a stream, a well, anything. Nothing but dry grass and rocky soil stretching to the horizon. "Just a little farther, baby. We'll find water soon." But she didn't believe it. And from the look in Margaret's eyes, her eldest didn't believe it either. They kept walking. Another hour passed, then another. The sun reached its peak and began its slow descent, but the heat didn't lessen. Eliza's vision started to blur at the edges. Her mouth was so dry she couldn't swallow. Rose was burning up again, her fever spiking despite the willow bark tea Eliza had given her that morning. "Mama." Margaret's voice was small, frightened. "Mama, I don't think—" That's when they heard it. A scream, high, sharp, full of terror. Somewhere ahead, just past the bend in the road. Eliza stopped walking. Every instinct told her to turn around, to protect her daughters, to run from whatever danger lay ahead. But the scream came again, and this time it was followed by a horrible, desperate shout. "Help! Someone help!" Margaret looked up at her mother. "What do we do?" Eliza stood frozen for one long moment, Rose limp in her arms, her other daughters staring at her with exhausted, trusting eyes. She had nothing left to give, no strength, no resources, no hope. But she'd been raised to believe that what you did when you had nothing left, that was what defined you. "Stay here," she told Margaret, lowering Rose carefully into her eldest daughter's arms. "Don't move unless I call for you." "Mama, I mean it, Margaret. Stay." Eliza ran. She rounded the bend and stopped dead. 50 yards ahead, a massive chestnut horse lay on its side in the middle of the road, thrashing and screaming. Beneath the animal, partially trapped, partially crushed, was a man. 3 other men stood nearby, 2 of them trying frantically to calm the panicked horse, while the third stared in horror at the trapped man. "Get a rope," one of them shouted. "We gotta pull him out before—" The horse kicked violently, its hoof missing the trapped man's head by inches. Eliza didn't think. She ran forward, grabbing the first man she reached, a young ranch hand with wild eyes. "Does he have family nearby? Someone who can help?" "Lady, you need to get back. Answer me. Is there help coming? We're 30 miles from the ranch. By the time we ride for help, he'll be dead." Eliza looked at the trapped man. He was unconscious now, blood seeping from a gash on his temple. The horse was still thrashing, still screaming. One wrong move and it would crush him completely. "We have to move the horse," Eliza said. "We can't. It's spooked too bad." "Then we dig him out." All 3 men stared at her. "What?" Eliza was already dropping to her knees beside the trapped man, assessing the situation with the quick, practical eye of a woman who'd spent her whole life on a farm. The horse had fallen in a slight depression in the road, probably a gopher hole or erosion damage. The man was pinned beneath its barrel, trapped, but not completely crushed. If they could excavate the soil beneath him, create enough space. "You got a shovel?" she demanded. "In the saddle pack, but—" "Get it, now." The young ranch hand scrambled to obey. Eliza was already clawing at the hard-packed dirt with her bare hands, digging frantically beneath the man's shoulders. The horse kicked again, and she felt the rush of air as its hoof passed inches from her head. "Ma'am, you're going to get yourself killed. Then help me or get out of the way." One of the other men, older, gray-bearded, dropped down beside her and started digging. Then the third man joined in. When the shovel arrived, they worked in desperate rotation, one person digging while the others dragged away soil and rocks. The sun beat down. Eliza's hands were bleeding, her nails torn, her dress soaked with sweat and dirt. But slowly, inch by terrible inch, they created space beneath the unconscious man. The horse was tiring now, its struggles becoming weaker. Whether that was good or bad, Eliza couldn't tell. "On 3, she gasped. "We pull him straight back. Don't lift. Just drag." The men positioned themselves. Eliza gripped the man's shoulders, her hands slipping on blood and sweat. 1, 2, 3. They pulled. For one horrible moment, nothing happened. The man stayed pinned, the weight too great. Then something shifted and suddenly he was moving, sliding backward through the excavated space, his body emerging from beneath the horse inch by agonizing inch. "Keep going! Don't stop!" They dragged him 10 feet clear before collapsing in the dirt, gasping for breath. The horse scrambled to its feet immediately, wild-eyed and trembling but apparently uninjured. It bolted down the road, leaving them in a cloud of dust. Eliza crawled back to the man she'd just saved. His breathing was shallow, labored. The gash on his temple was still bleeding. but he was alive. "Who is he?" she asked hoarsely. The gray-bearded man was staring at her like she'd grown a second head. "Lady, do you have any idea what you just did?" I asked who he is. "That's Caleb Mercer." The name meant nothing to Eliza. She was too busy checking the man's injuries, her hands moving with the automatic competence of someone who'd nursed a dying husband through 6 months of fever. Broken ribs, probably. Possible concussion, lacerations that would need stitching. "He needs a doctor," she said. "How far to the nearest town?" "Copper Hollow's about 8 miles back." "No." The word came out harder than she'd intended. "Somewhere else. Any other town." The three men exchanged glances. Finally, the young ranch hand spoke up carefully. "Ma'am, Caleb Mercer owns most of Copper Hollow, and all the land between here and the next county. I don't care if he owns the whole state of Texas," Eliza interrupted. "He needs medical attention, and he needs it now. Where's the nearest doctor who isn't in Copper Hollow?" "The ranch," the gray-bearded man said. "Mercer Ranch, about 12 miles west. We got a medical man there, best one in the territory." Eliza looked down at the unconscious stranger. Caleb Mercer, rich man, powerful man, the kind of man whose world was as far from hers as the sun from the earth. And she'd just saved his life. Behind her, she heard small footsteps. Margaret appeared around the bend, carrying Rose, with Lily trailing behind. "Mama, we heard shouting." The three ranch hands were staring at her daughters now, at Rose's flushed, fevered face, at the girl's ragged clothes and sunburned skin, at Eliza herself, covered in blood and dirt, her hands torn and bleeding. "You got children," the graybeard said slowly, "walking alone on this road." It wasn't a question. Eliza lifted her chin. "That's none of your concern." "Walking away from Copper Hollow, with nothing but the clothes on your backs." His eyes narrowed. "That's Richard Harper's doing, isn't it?" Eliza's breath caught. "You know Richard?" "Everyone knows Richard Harper. Snake mean bastard, begging your pardon. Heard he inherited his brother's place recently." The man looked at her daughters again, and something softened in his weathered face. "You're Thomas Harper's widow." "I was." Eliza's voice was steady. "Now I'm nobody." "You're the woman who just saved Caleb Mercer's life." The graybeard stood up, brushing dirt from his pants. "And that makes you somebody whether you know it or not." He turned to the other two men. "Carlos, ride back to the ranch. Tell them what happened and bring the wagon. We'll need it to transport Mr. Mercer safely." To the young ranch hand, "You stay here with me and Mrs. Harper. Keep watch in case that damn horse comes back." Carlos mounted up and rode off at a gallop. The graybeard extended a hand to Eliza. "Name's Jacob Worth, foreman at Mercer Ranch for 23 years, and you just did a thing most men wouldn't have the guts to attempt." Eliza shook his hand, feeling the calluses that matched her own. "I didn't do it for guts. I did it because it needed doing." "All the same," Jacob glanced at her daughters. "Your little one there, she's sick. Scarlet fever. We've been treating it, but you're out here walking instead of home where she should be resting." Jacob's expression was grim. "Richard threw you out." It wasn't a question this time either. Eliza just nodded. "Bastard," Jacob muttered again. Then louder. "Well, you're coming back to the ranch with us. Mr. Mercer's going to want to thank you himself when he wakes up, and that little girl needs proper care. No arguments," he added, as Eliza started to protest. "You just saved my boss's life. The least we can do is make sure your daughter doesn't die of fever on a roadside." Eliza looked at Rose's fevered face, at Margaret's exhaustion, at Lily's sunburned cheeks. She'd left Copper Hollow with no plan and no hope. She'd walked 8 miles toward nothing. And now, because she'd stopped to help a stranger, everything had changed. She didn't know yet if it had changed for better or worse. But standing there in the Texas dust with blood on her hands and her daughters at her side, Eliza Harper made the same choice she'd made 8 miles back when she'd first heard that scream. She chose to keep going. "All right," she said quietly. "We'll come to the ranch." Jacob Worth smiled for the first time since she'd met him. "Good, because I got a feeling Mr. Mercer's going to want you to stay a whole lot longer than just for thanks." The wagon arrived an hour later, a sturdy flatbed driven by a man who introduced himself simply as Tom, He took one look at Caleb Mercer's unconscious form and went pale, but he didn't waste time with questions. Together, the men carefully lifted Caleb into the wagon bed, patting him with blankets. Eliza and her daughters were helped up next. Margaret and Lily huddled together on one side while Eliza cradled Rose, who'd slipped into a deep, troubling sleep. Jacob Worth swung up onto his horse and led the way. They headed west into the setting sun. The landscape changed gradually as they traveled. The scrubland gave way to rolling grassland, then to fenced pastures where cattle grazed in the long shadows of evening. Eliza saw windmills in the distance, their blades turning slowly, water tanks, outbuildings, signs of wealth and careful management. "How big is this ranch?" she asked Jacob, who'd ridden up alongside the wagon. 70,000 acres, give or take, runs from the Trinity River north to the Red River Valley. Mr. Mercer's father started it 40 years ago with nothing but a land grant and a wagon full of longhorns. Built it into the biggest operation in the territory. And Caleb Mercer runs it now? Has for 10 years since his father passed. And before you ask, yes, he's tough. Yes, he's demanding, but he's fair, and he pays honest wages, and every man who works for him would ride through hell for him. Jacob's voice was matter of fact. Which is why what you did today, pulling him out from under that horse, that's going to mean something. Eliza looked down at the unconscious man in the wagon bed. Even hurt and covered in dirt, she could see the strength in him, broad shoulders, calloused hands, a face that looked like it had been carved from the same hard stone as the land he owned. There was a scar along his jaw, old and white, and his dark hair was threaded with early gray despite what she guessed was an age somewhere in his mid-30s. "Will he be all right?" Margaret asked from beside her mother. "Doc Brennan will see to him," Jacob assured her. Then he paused. "Wait, did you say Brennan?" "He's the doctor who treated my sister," Margaret said. "He came to our house every day until Mama ran out of money." Jacob's expression darkened. "Brennan's in Copper Hollow." "Yes, sir." "And he knew you were leaving? Knew you had a sick child and no resources?" Eliza spoke up before Margaret could answer. "Dr. Brennan did what he could within the limits of what I could pay. Nothing more was owed." "Nothing more was owed," Jacob repeated flatly. "That's one way to look at it, I suppose." He spurred his horse forward, ending the conversation. They rode in silence as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Rose stirred occasionally, whimpering in her fevered sleep, and each time Eliza's heart clenched with fear. The little girl's fever had been high for 3 days now, much longer, and she couldn't finish the thought. "There," Jacob called out. "Mercer Ranch." Eliza looked up and felt her breath catch. The ranch spread out before them like a small town. The main house was massive, 2 stories of white-painted wood with a wraparound porch and green shutters. To the left stood a long bunkhouse, to the right a series of barns and corrals. Beyond those she could see more outbuildings, a smokehouse, a smithy, what might have been a dairy. Lanterns were being lit against the gathering darkness, turning the ranch into a constellation of warm lights. "Good Lord," Eliza whispered. "Mr. Mercer's father believed in building to last," Jacob said with unmistakable pride, "and in being ready for anything. We got near about 60 hands working year-round, plus seasonal workers during branding and drive times. We're self-sufficient, grow most of our own food, raise our own horses, even got a schoolhouse for the workers' children." As the wagon pulled into the main yard, people began emerging from the various buildings. Ranch hands, Mexican vaqueros, a few women who must have been cooks or housekeepers. They all stopped and stared as they saw Caleb Mercer's unconscious form in the wagon bed. "Jacob!" A woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pushed through the crowd. "What happened?" "Horse accident, Mrs. Chen. This lady here pulled him out." Jacob gestured to Eliza. "Send someone for Doc Carter. And prepare a room. Mr. Mercer's going to need round-the-clock care for a few days." The woman, Mrs. Chen, gave Eliza a sharp, assessing look, then turned and started issuing orders in rapid Cantonese. 2 men carefully lifted Caleb from the wagon and carried him toward the main house. "Your daughters?" Mrs. Chen said, switching to English as she looked at Margaret, Lily, and Rose. "The little one is sick." "Scarlet fever," Eliza said quietly. "She needs—" "I can see what she needs. Bring them all inside. First door on the right. That's the guest room." Get them settled while we tend to Mr. Mercer. It wasn't an offer, it was a command, but Eliza found herself obeying anyway, gathering her daughters and following Mrs. Chen into the house. The interior was as impressive as the exterior, polished wood floors, sturdy furniture, oil paintings on the walls. But there was something sparse about it too, something that suggested a house maintained but not truly lived in. No flowers in vases, no photographs on the mantel, just clean, empty spaces. Mrs. Chen showed them to a room with a large bed, a washstand, and windows that looked out over the darkening prairie. Get cleaned up. I'll send food and fresh clothes. The doctor will see to your daughter as soon as he's finished with Mr. Mercer. We can't impose, Eliza began. You saved his life. Mrs. Chen's voice was firm. There's no imposition in accepting what you've earned. Now wash up. You're covered in blood. She left before Eliza could argue further. Margaret immediately went to the washstand and began carefully washing Lily's face and hands. Eliza laid Rose on the bed, her heart aching at how small and fragile her youngest daughter looked against the white sheets. Mama? Lily's voice was very small. Are we staying here? Just for tonight, baby. Just until Rose is better. And then where do we go? Eliza had no answer for that. She was saved from having to try by a knock on the door. A young Mexican woman entered carrying a tray of food: bread, cheese, sliced beef, and a pitcher of cold water. Behind her came another woman with an armful of clean clothes. Mrs. Chen says to eat and rest, the first woman said in accented English. Doctor will come soon. The food disappeared quickly. Eliza hadn't realized how hungry they were until she tasted that first bite of bread. Margaret ate methodically, making sure Lily got her share before taking seconds herself. They changed into the clean clothes, simple cotton dresses that were slightly too large but infinitely better than their dirt-stained traveling clothes. Then they waited. An hour passed. Through the walls, Eliza could hear low voices, footsteps moving urgently back and forth. She sat beside Rose, sponging her fevered skin and whispering wordless comfort. Finally, the door opened. A man in his 60s entered, carrying a black medical bag. He had kind eyes and steady hands, and when he looked at Rose, his expression became immediately professional. I'm Dr. Carter. Mrs. Chen tells me this young lady has scarlet fever. 3 days now, Eliza said. I've been giving her willow bark tea and keeping her cool, but the fever won't break. Dr. Carter set down his bag and began a thorough examination. He checked Rose's throat, her tongue, her skin. He listened to her breathing and felt her pulse. After several long minutes, he sat back. You did exactly right with the willow bark and cooling, but she needs more aggressive treatment now. I have a tincture that should help bring the fever down, and an antibiotic compound that will fight the infection. She'll need both administered every 4 hours around the clock for at least 2 days. I can do that, Eliza said immediately. I'm sure you can. Dr. Carter's eyes were gentle. But you're exhausted, Mrs. Harper. Eliza Harper. Mrs. Harper, when's the last time you slept? Eliza couldn't remember. The doctor nodded as if he'd expected as much. I'll have Mrs. Chen arrange for a nurse to help with the night shift. You'll take the day shift. Between the two of you, we'll keep this little one monitored constantly. He began preparing the medicines from his bag. Now, I've just come from treating Mr. Mercer. I understand I have you to thank for his survival. I just did what anyone would have done. No, Dr. Carter said quietly, measuring out a dose of dark liquid. You did what very few people would have the courage to do. Jacob told me you crawled under a thrashing horse to dig him out. That's not normal behavior, Mrs. Harper. That's extraordinary. Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Dr. Carter administered the medicine to Rose, who swallowed reflexively but didn't wake. There. She should rest easier now. I'll be back in 4 hours to check on her and give her the next dose. He stood, gathering his bag. Try to get some sleep yourself, Mrs. Harper. Your daughter's going to need you strong when she wakes up. After he left, exhaustion hit Eliza like a physical blow. Margaret and Lily were already curled up together at the foot of the bed, fast asleep. Eliza stretched out beside Rose, one hand on her daughter's fevered forehead, and closed her eyes. She didn't mean to sleep. She meant to keep watch, to stay vigilant, but her body had other ideas. Within minutes, she was unconscious. She woke to daylight streaming through the windows and the sound of birdsong. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The road, the horse, Caleb Mercer, this impossible place where they'd ended up. Rose was still sleeping, but her breathing seemed easier. Eliza touched her forehead and nearly cried with relief. The fever had broken. Not entirely, but enough. Enough to mean hope. Margaret and Lily were gone from the bed. Eliza sat up in panic before she heard their voices outside the door, laughing. Actually laughing. She got up and looked out the window. Below, in the ranch yard, Margaret and Lily were standing with Mrs. Chen and several other children, apparently being shown how to feed chickens. Lily was giggling as a hen pecked grain from her outstretched palm. When had Eliza last heard her daughter laugh? A soft knock on the door. Mrs. Chen entered carrying a breakfast tray. The fever broke 2 hours ago. Doctor. Carter checked on her at dawn. He says she's past the crisis point. Eliza sank back onto the bed, overwhelmed. Thank you. Thank all of you. I don't know how to... Mr. Mercer is awake, Mrs. Chen interrupted. He's asking to see you. Eliza's stomach tightened. Now? When you're ready. But yes, preferably soon. He's not a patient man even when he's bedridden with broken ribs. Mrs. Chen left the tray and departed. Eliza ate quickly, checking on Rose every few minutes. The little girl's color was better, her breathing steady. Still deeply asleep, but it was the sleep of healing now, not fever delirium. Finally, Eliza smoothed her borrowed dress, ran fingers through her tangled hair, and went to find Caleb Mercer. Mrs. Chen led her down a hallway lined with closed doors, and up a staircase that creaked under their footsteps. The second floor was quieter, more private. At the end of the hall, Mrs. Chen stopped before a heavy oak door. He's expecting you. Don't let him bully you. The man's meaner than a rattlesnake when he's laid up and can't work. She paused, her expression softening slightly. But he's fair, remember that. Then she was gone, leaving Eliza alone in the hallway. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and knocked. Come in. The voice was rough, edged with pain and something that might have been irritation. Eliza opened the door. The room was sparse like the rest of the house. Functional rather than comfortable. A large bed dominated the space, and in it sat Caleb Mercer, propped up against pillows with his chest wrapped in bandages. His face was bruised, the gash on his temple freshly stitched, and his dark eyes tracked her movement as she entered. He was studying her the same way she imagined he studied cattle before buying them, assessing value, looking for weaknesses. Mrs. Harper. His voice was stronger than she'd expected for a man who'd been unconscious yesterday. Jacob tells me I owe you my life. Eliza stopped a respectful distance from the bed. Jacob exaggerates. You'd have been fine. I'd have been crushed or bled out on that road. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Don't diminish what you did. I don't like false modesty any more than I like liars. The bluntness caught her off guard. Most men would have dressed it up in flowery gratitude, made a show of their appreciation. Caleb Mercer apparently didn't believe in wasting words. All right then, Eliza said, matching his directness. You're welcome. A flicker of something, surprise, amusement, crossed his face. Jacob also tells me Richard Harper threw you out of your home, that you were walking away from Copper Hollow with 3 daughters and $2 to your name. Heat flooded Eliza's cheeks. That's my business, Mr. Mercer, not yours. It became my business when you stopped to help me instead of keeping your head down and walking on by. Caleb shifted against the pillows and winced. Most people wouldn't have stopped, especially not someone in your position, desperate, vulnerable, with children to protect. You had every reason to keep moving. I had every reason to help. Eliza met his eyes steadily. I was raised to believe that what you do when it costs you something, that's what matters. Caleb studied her for a long moment. Your husband. How'd he die? The question was invasive, too personal, but Eliza found herself answering anyway. Consumption, 6 months from diagnosis to burial. I sold everything we had to pay for doctors who couldn't do anything but watch him waste away. And his brother moved in the moment the body was cold. The moment the will was forged, yes. You got proof of forgery? Eliza's laugh was bitter. I've got nothing. No witnesses, no documentation, no legal standing. Richard had the judge and half the town convinced before I even knew what was happening. By the time I tried to fight it, the battle was already lost. So you ran. I left, Eliza corrected sharply. There's a difference. Is there? Caleb's tone wasn't mocking, just curious. Seems to me running and leaving end up in the same place, somewhere that isn't home. Home stopped being home the day my husband died and his brother decided I was an inconvenience to be managed. Eliza felt her control fraying at the edges. Now, if you're finished interrogating me about my failures, I'd like to get back to my daughter. Dr. Carter said, the little one's fever broke 2 hours ago. She's sleeping peacefully. Caleb's voice softened fractionally. Mrs. Chen's been checking on her every 20 minutes. Dr. Treater. We'll leave as soon as Dr. Treat her. We'll leave as soon as she's strong enough to travel. And go where? The question hung in the air between them. Eliza had no answer because there was no answer. She had $2, 3 daughters, and a brother-in-law who'd do everything in his power to make sure she stayed broken and desperate. That's what I thought. Caleb adjusted his position again, clearly in pain but too stubborn to show it. Here's what's going to happen, Mrs. Harper. You're going to stay here at the ranch until your daughter is fully recovered. No arguments, he added as she opened her mouth to protest. Dr. Carter says scarlet fever needs at least 2 weeks of careful monitoring, even after the crisis passes. You stay until he clears her. Mr. Mercer, I can't accept. Second, he continued as if she hadn't spoken, you're going to let me look into this business with your brother-in-law. I've got lawyers on retainer who handle my land deals. They can examine the will, trace the witnesses, find out if there's any legal recourse. I told you there's no proof. There's always proof if you know where to look and who to lean on. Caleb's eyes were hard now, focused. Richard Harper made a mistake when he threw you out. He made himself visible. Men like him, men who forge documents and steal from widows, they always make more than one mistake. We just have to find the others. Eliza wanted to hope. She wanted it so badly it physically hurt, but hope had betrayed her too many times already. Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything beyond basic hospitality while Rose recovers. I owe you my life. One act doesn't create a permanent debt. Maybe not. Caleb's expression was unreadable. But I've built this ranch on a simple principle, Mrs. Harper. You reward the people who show up when it matters. You showed up yesterday when you had every reason not to. Now I'm showing up for you. That's how it works. Eliza felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she'd built around herself to survive the last brutal months. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you'll stay until Rose is well. Say you'll let my lawyers look into Richard's dealings. Everything else, we'll figure out as we go. Caleb paused. Unless you've got a better offer waiting somewhere down that road you were walking. Despite everything, the exhaustion, the fear, the weight of too many losses, Eliza almost smiled. No, no better offer. Then it's settled. A knock on the door interrupted them. Jacob Worth entered, hat in hand, looking apologetic. Sorry to intrude, boss, but we got a situation with the north fence line. Looks like someone cut the wire overnight. 20 head of cattle wandered onto Crawford's property. Caleb's jaw tightened. Crawford or his boys do the cutting. Can't prove it, but the timing's mighty convenient. He's been after that section of land for 2 years now. Tell him I want my cattle back by sundown, or I'll come get them myself. Jacob's eyes flicked to Caleb's bandaged chest. Boss, you can't even get out of bed. Then I'll ride over there sitting in a wagon if I have to. Those are my cattle on my land, and Crawford knows it. Caleb's voice had gone cold, dangerous. He's testing me because he heard about the accident. Send word, cattle return by sundown, or we settle it another way. Yes, sir. Jacob glanced at Eliza. Ma'am, your daughters are asking after you. Mrs. Chen's got them fed and settled, but the little one's awake now. Eliza stood immediately. I should go to her. Mrs. Harper, Caleb's voice stopped her at the door. We have an agreement? She looked back at him. This hard, direct man who'd offered her something she'd thought was gone forever. A chance. Not charity, not pity. Just a fair exchange between equals. We have an agreement. His nod was brief, satisfied. Good. Jacob will show you where to find your daughters. And Mrs. Harper, Welcome to Mercer Ranch. The dismissal was clear. Eliza followed Jacob out of the room and back down the stairs, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened. In the space of 24 hours, she'd gone from desperate and homeless to what? A guest? A temporary resident? Something else entirely? Don't let him scare you, Jacob said quietly as they walked. Caleb's bark is worse than his bite. Usually. Usually? Well, sometimes his bite's pretty bad too. Jacob's weathered face creased in a smile. But never with people who've earned his respect. And pulling him out from under that horse? That earned you more respect than you can probably imagine. They emerged into bright sunlight. The ranch was alive with activity. Men working horses in the corral, someone repairing a wagon wheel near the barn, a group of women hanging laundry on lines strung between posts. It was a functioning world unto itself, and Eliza had just been invited to step inside it. Jacob led her to a small cottage set back from the main house. This is where Mrs. Chen lives, but she's got your daughters with her now. Figured they needed some mothering while you were talking to the boss. Inside, Eliza found her 3 daughters sitting at a worn kitchen table eating what looked like fresh biscuits with honey. Rose was pale and tired but conscious, wrapped in a thick quilt with her eyes tracking every movement in the room. "Mama!" Lily jumped up and ran to her. "Mrs. Chen made biscuits, and she's teaching us Cantonese. Look." She held up her hand and counted to 5 in halting, accented syllables. Margaret stood more slowly, her serious eyes searching Eliza's face. "Are we staying, Mama?" Mrs. Chen appeared from an adjoining room, wiping her hands on her apron. "Of course you're staying, at least until the little one is strong again. Mr. Mercer's orders." "Mr. Mercer and I discussed it," Eliza said carefully. "We'll stay for a while, just until Rose is better." "And then?" Margaret's voice was quiet but insistent. "And then we'll see." It was the only honest answer Eliza had. Rose made a small sound from her chair. Eliza went to her immediately, kneeling beside her youngest daughter and touching her forehead. The fever was definitely lower, the skin merely warm instead of burning. "How do you feel, baby?" "Tired." Rose's voice was a whisper. "But the bad dreams stopped." "That's because the medicine is working. You're going to get better, I promise." "I like it here." Rose leaned against her mother. "It's pretty. And Mrs. Chen makes good biscuits." Mrs. Chen snorted softly. "Child has good taste. You 3 want to see the rest of the ranch? Give your mama some time with the little one?" Margaret and Lily looked to Eliza for permission. She nodded, and they followed Mrs. Chen outside, Lily chattering questions in her usual fashion, while Margaret walked in her quiet, watchful way. Alone with Rose, Eliza helped her daughter back to the guest room and tucked her into bed. "You scared me," she whispered, smoothing Rose's hair. "You scared me so badly." "Sorry, Mama." "No, baby. Never be sorry for being sick. I'm just grateful you're getting better." Eliza lay down beside her daughter, wrapping her in a gentle embrace. "Do you remember much about yesterday? About walking on the road?" Rose was quiet for a moment. "I remember being hot, and you carrying me, and then a big house? Did we get to the cottage Uncle Richard talked about?" "No. We're somewhere better." Eliza wasn't sure she believed it herself yet, but she wanted Rose to feel safe. "We're at a ranch where people are kind, where a doctor came to help you without worrying about payment first, where your sisters can laugh again. Can we stay forever?" The question pierced straight through Eliza's heart. "We'll stay as long as we're welcome, sweetheart. That's all I can promise." Rose's eyes were already drifting closed again, exhaustion pulling her back towards sleep. Eliza stayed beside her, listening to her daughter's breathing even out, and allowed herself a moment of pure relief. Rose was alive. They were safe. For now, that was enough. A soft knock on the door. Eliza eased away from Rose and found Dr. Carter waiting in the hallway with his medical bag. "Just checking on my patient," he said quietly. "How's she doing?" "Tired but awake. The fever's definitely lower." Dr. Carter conducted a brief examination while Rose dozed. When he finished, his expression was satisfied. "She's past the worst of it. Keep her resting, keep her hydrated, and she should make a full recovery. I'll check in twice daily for the next week, then we can reassess." "Thank you, Doctor. I don't know how I'll ever repay—" "Mrs. Harper." Dr. Carter's voice was gentle but firm. Mr. Mercer has already made it clear that all medical expenses are to be billed directly to the ranch. Your daughter's care, your own care if needed, anything else that comes up. You're not to worry about payment. Eliza felt her throat tighten. That's too generous. That's Caleb Mercer. He takes care of his own, and as of yesterday, you and your daughters are under his protection, whether you fully understand what that means yet or not. Dr. Carter closed his bag. My advice? Accept it with grace. Men like Caleb don't make offers like this lightly, and they don't take kindly to rejection of what they consider fair dealing. After he left, Eliza sat in the chair beside Rose's bed and let the reality of their situation sink in. They'd fallen into something impossible, a place of safety they hadn't earned and couldn't repay. It felt precarious, like standing on ice that might crack at any moment. But Rose was breathing steadily in the bed. Margaret and Lily were outside somewhere, probably exploring the ranch with the fearless curiosity of children who'd been given a temporary reprieve from worry. And Eliza herself was clean, fed, and sitting in a comfortable chair instead of walking a dusty road toward nowhere. Maybe precarious was better than desperate. Maybe she could learn to accept help without feeling like she was drowning in debt. Maybe. The afternoon passed quietly. Eliza dozed in the chair while Rose slept. At some point, Mrs. Chen brought food, a bowl of rich soup and fresh bread. Later, Margaret and Lily returned, sun-flushed and excited, talking over each other about the horses they'd seen and the children they'd met and the absolutely enormous barn that had a loft you could jump from into hay. Can we stay, Mama? Lily asked for the third time. Please? Just a little while? We're staying until Rose is better, Eliza repeated. After that, we'll see. But that night, lying in the dark with her 3 daughters sleeping peacefully nearby, Eliza allowed herself to wonder what after that might actually look like. If Caleb Mercer's lawyers could find proof of Richard's forgery, could she really get her farm back? Could she return to Copper Hollow and reclaim the life that had been stolen? And if she could, did she even want to? The farm held nothing but memories of loss now. Thomas was gone. The fields had gone to seed. The house would be filled with the ghost of Richard's occupation. Even if she won it back legally, what then? She'd be a widow alone with 3 daughters, trying to work land she couldn't manage by herself, surrounded by neighbors who'd watched her be thrown out and done nothing. The thought made her chest tight with something that felt uncomfortably like grief. She'd spent the last months fighting to keep what she'd had, to preserve what she'd built with Thomas. But maybe what she'd had was already gone, not just stolen by Richard, but erased by Thomas's death. Maybe there was no going back to before, only forward to whatever came next. The question was, what came next? Sleep took her before she found an answer. She woke before dawn to the sound of men's voices outside, the ranch coming to life as the hands started their day. Rose was still asleep, her breathing easy and unlabored. Margaret and Lily were tangled together at the foot of the bed, peaceful in a way Eliza hadn't seen in months. She rose quietly and slipped outside. The ranch at dawn was beautiful in a stark, honest way. The sky was turning from black to deep blue, the first light touching the distant hills. Men moved through the half-darkness with purpose, heading to the barns to start the day's work. Somewhere a rooster crowed. The smell of coffee and frying bacon drifted from the cookhouse. Up early, Jacob Worth appeared beside her, holding 2 tin cups of coffee. He offered one to Eliza. Couldn't sleep? Not used to sleeping past dawn. Too many years of farm work, I suppose. Eliza accepted the coffee gratefully. It was strong and bitter and perfect. Does it always start this early? Cattle don't care about sleep schedules, and neither does drought. Jacob's face was grim in the pre-dawn light. We're in the worst dry spell I've seen in 20 years. The creek beds are showing bone, the grass is dying, and if we don't get rain soon, we're going to have to start selling off stock we can't feed. Eliza looked out at the ranch with new eyes, seeing past the obvious prosperity to the signs of strain. The water troughs that were being carefully rationed, the patches of bare dirt where grass should have been, the tension in the men's movements as they worked. How bad is it really? She asked. Jacob glanced at her, seeming to reassess. Bad. We've got enough water for the stock for maybe another month if we're careful. After that, he shrugged. After that, we either get rain or we start making hard choices. What about drilling new wells? Mr. Mercer's already got 3 crews working on it. Problem is, the water table's dropped so low in this drought that we're having to drill deeper than ever. And even when we hit water, it's not enough to support the whole operation. Jacob sipped his coffee. This ranch has survived droughts before, though. We'll survive this one. Mr. Mercer's too stubborn to let it fail. Stubborn doesn't make rainfall. No, but it keeps you going until the rain does. Jacob smiled slightly. You'll understand once you've been here a while. Caleb Mercer's got the kind of will that bends the world around him. Not always gently, but effectively. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the ranch wake fully. As the sun broke over the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, Eliza felt something shift inside her, some small easing of the constant vigilance she'd carried since Thomas died. She wasn't safe yet, wasn't settled. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't actively terrified either. Mrs. Harper? A young man approached, hat in hand. Mrs. Chen says if you're available, there's a boy in the main house who could use some help. Mr. Mercer's nephew. He's not doing so well this morning. Eliza exchanged a glance with Jacob, who nodded. Noah, Caleb's sister's boy. Lost his mother 6 months back, and he hasn't spoken a word since. Doctor says there's nothing physically wrong. It's grief that's got him locked up inside. How old is he? 5. Sweet kid, but Jacob's expression was pained. He just stares at nothing most days. Won't eat unless you put food directly in his hands. Won't play with the other children. Just exists. Something in Eliza's chest tightened with recognition. She knew that kind of grief, the kind that shut you down so completely that even breathing felt like too much effort. She'd felt it herself in the weeks after Thomas died. I'll see him, she said quietly. The young man led her to the main house and up to a small room on the 2nd floor. Inside, she found a little boy sitting on the edge of a bed, staring at the wall with eyes that held nothing. Not sadness, not anger, just terrible, complete emptiness. Noah? Eliza approached slowly, making her voice gentle. My name is Eliza. Can I sit with you? No response. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. Eliza sat down in a chair across from him anyway. I have 3 daughters, she continued conversationally, as if he'd responded. Margaret is 9, very serious, very smart. Lily is 7. She talks enough for 3 people and loves anything that grows. And Rose is 4. She's been very sick, but she's getting better now. Still nothing. But Eliza had nursed a dying husband for 6 months. She knew how to sit with silence. Rose almost died a few days ago, she said quietly. The fever was so high and I was so scared. I thought I might lose her the same way I lost their father. Do you know what losing someone feels like, Noah? For the first time, the boy's eyes moved. Just slightly, just enough to show he was listening. It feels like a hole opened up inside you, Eliza continued. Like part of you fell into that hole and you can't get it back. And talking about it, or crying about it, or doing anything at all, it just makes the hole bigger, so you stop. You just stop, and everything gets very quiet. Noah's hands were clenched in his lap, his small body rigid. The quiet feels safer than the noise, Eliza said. Because the noise hurts. The noise means you have to feel things, and feeling things is the worst part. So you choose quiet instead. She sat with him for a long time, not saying anything more, just being present in the silence he'd built around himself. Eventually, she stood to leave. I'll come back tomorrow if that's all right, she told him. You don't have to talk to me. You don't have to do anything at all. I'll just sit here with you, and we can be quiet together. She'd reached the door when a small voice stopped her. My mama's gone. The words were barely more than a whisper, but they hit Eliza like a physical blow. She turned slowly. Noah was still staring at the wall, but tears were running silently down his face. I know, sweetheart. I know she is. Uncle Caleb says she's in heaven, that she's watching over me. Noah's voice cracked. But I can't see her. I can't hear her. How can she be watching if I can't see her? Eliza crossed back to him and knelt down so they were eye to eye. I don't know, Noah. I don't have good answers about heaven or watching over people or why the people we love have to go away, but I do know this. Your mama loved you, And that love doesn't go away just because she did. It's still here. She placed a gentle hand over his heart. In here. You carry it with you. It hurts, Noah whispered. I know. Love hurts when the person is gone, but it hurts because it was real. Because she was real and she mattered, and you miss her. Eliza's own eyes were burning now. The hurt means you loved her enough that losing her changed everything. And that's not a bad thing, Noah. That's actually the best thing, because it means she was worth loving. Noah's face crumpled, and suddenly he was sobbing, deep, wrenching sobs that shook his small frame. Eliza gathered him into her arms and held him while he cried, all the grief he'd been holding in for 6 months pouring out at once. She didn't try to stop him, didn't try to soothe him or tell him it would be okay. She just held him and let him break apart, because sometimes breaking apart was the only way to eventually heal. When the sobs finally subsided into hiccups and shaking breaths, Noah stayed curled against her. Will you come back tomorrow? He asked, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Every day, Eliza promised, for as long as you need me to. She stayed with him until he fell asleep, emotionally exhausted. Then she carefully transferred him to his bed and tucked the blankets around him. As she turned to leave, she found Caleb Mercer standing in the doorway. He was leaning heavily on a cane, his face pale with pain and effort, but his eyes were fixed on his sleeping nephew with an expression that made Eliza's throat tight. He spoke, Caleb said quietly. I heard him from this hallway. He actually spoke. He needed to. Eliza moved past him into the hallway, pulling the door partially closed. He's been holding everything in for too long. It was poisoning him from the inside. Doctors tried everything. I tried everything. Caleb's voice was rough. Nothing worked, and then you walk in and he just opens up. I didn't do anything special. I just told him the truth about grief. Eliza met his eyes steadily. Sometimes children need to hear that it's okay to hurt, that they're not broken for feeling what they feel. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. His mother was my younger sister, Sarah. She died in childbirth, complications that came out of nowhere. One minute she was fine, and the next... He stopped, his jaw working. Noah was there. He saw the whole thing, the bleeding, the panic, the doctors unable to stop it. He was holding her hand when she died. Eliza felt her heart break for the child sleeping in the next room. And his father? Never in the picture. Sarah raised Noah alone until she couldn't anymore. Caleb's expression was bleak. I'm all he has left, and I don't know how to help him. I can run a ranch, manage thousands of head of cattle, negotiate deals that would make grown men weep, but I can't help a 5-year-old boy process his grief. You're helping him by being here, by not giving up. Eliza spoke gently. The rest, the healing, the learning how to live with loss, that takes time. You can't force it. How long did it take you after your husband died? The question was intrusive, but Eliza found she didn't mind. I don't know. I'm not sure I'm done taking time yet. She paused. Thomas died 4 months ago, but in some ways I lost him long before that. The last 2 months of his life, he wasn't really there anymore. The fever had him, the disease had him. I was caring for a shell of the man I'd married, so when he finally died, it was almost a relief, which made me feel guilty, which made the grief worse. Caleb studied her with those dark, assessing eyes. You loved him. With everything I had. He was a good man, kind, steady, honest. He deserved better than what life gave him. And his brother? Eliza's expression hardened. Richard is everything Thomas wasn't. Mean where Thomas was kind. Dishonest where Thomas was true. I think Thomas knew what his brother was capable of, but he never believed Richard would actually... She stopped, the old anger rising. I was naive. I thought people had limits, lines they wouldn't cross. I was wrong. You weren't naive. You were optimistic. There's a difference. Caleb shifted his weight, wincing. And for what it's worth, my lawyers are already looking into Richard Harper. I sent a wire this morning. They'll start pulling records, interviewing witnesses, finding the cracks in his story. You didn't have to do that so quickly. I told you I would. I don't make promises I don't keep. Caleb's voice was matter of fact. Besides, men like Richard, they offend me on a fundamental level. They take what they haven't earned and destroy what others built. I don't tolerate it when it happens to me, and I won't tolerate it when it happens to someone under my protection. I'm not under your protection, Eliza said, though the words felt automatic rather than true. Aren't you? Caleb's smile was slight, almost mocking. You're living in my house, eating my food, receiving care from my doctor. Your daughters are playing with the children of my ranch hands. You accepted my help with your legal troubles. At what point does all of that not constitute my protection? Eliza wanted to argue, but the truth was, he was right. She'd accepted everything he'd offered, and in doing so, she'd placed herself and her daughters under his authority, whether she'd meant to or not. I don't like feeling powerless, she admitted quietly. Then don't be powerless. Caleb's eyes were sharp. You've got skills, don't you? Things you can do? I can cook, clean, sew, manage a household. I know basic medicine from caring for Thomas. I can work a garden, preserve food, handle livestock, all the things any farm wife knows. And you saved my life by thinking fast under pressure. Caleb nodded slowly, as if reaching a decision. Here's what I'm proposing. You don't want to feel like charity, so don't be charity. Earn your keep. How? Mrs. Chen's getting older. She does too much as it is, managing the main house, overseeing the cook staff, handling supplies. She needs help. Caleb's tone was businesslike now. You work with her, learn how she runs things, take over some of the burden. And with Noah, he responded to you. Keep working with him, help him heal. It wasn't charity, it was employment, a fair exchange of labor for shelter and safety. Eliza felt something ease in her chest. What about my daughters? They're children. Let them be children. There's a schoolhouse here where the workers' kids go. Margaret and Lily can join them once Rose is well enough to be alone during the day. Until then, they help where they can and play when they can't. Eliza hesitated, looking for the trap. But Caleb's expression was open, honest in its directness. Why are you doing this? Really? I told you, you showed up when it mattered. And that's all? Just return a favor? Caleb's expression shifted, became something harder to read. My father built this ranch from nothing. He taught me that success comes from recognizing value when you see it and not letting it slip away. You've got value, Mrs. Harper. Strength, resourcefulness, courage. Those aren't things you can buy or train into someone. They're either there or they're not. He paused. I'd be a fool to let you walk away just because you're too proud to accept help. And whatever else I am, I'm not a fool. It was the most honest answer anyone had given her in months. Not pity, not obligation, not even simple gratitude. Just recognition of value and a practical desire to keep it close. Eliza could work with that. All right, she said, I'll work with Mrs. Chen. I'll help with Noah. And in exchange, you provide shelter and safety for me and my daughters until we can figure out what comes next. Deal. Caleb extended his hand. Eliza shook it, feeling the calluses that matched her own, the strength in his grip despite his injuries. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt like she was standing on solid ground instead of sinking sand. One more thing, Caleb said as she turned to go. About your daughters, particularly the middle one. Lily? What about her? She's got something special with growing things, doesn't she? I saw her in the vegetable garden this morning, talking to the tomato plants like they were people. Mrs. Chen said she's never seen anyone with that kind of natural touch. Eliza smiled despite herself. Lily can make anything grow, even in the worst soil, even in drought. It's like plants just want to thrive for her. We're in a drought now. The vegetable gardens are struggling, the feed crops are dying, and I've got 300 head of cattle that need grazing land that's turning to dust. Caleb's expression was thoughtful. Maybe your daughter could help with that, if she's willing. She's 7 years old, and apparently better with plants than most men twice her age. Caleb shrugged. I'm not saying put her to hard labor. I'm saying let her do what she loves while helping us solve a problem. Everyone wins. It made sense in a strange way. Lily had always been happiest with her hands in dirt, coaxing life from seeds. Giving her purpose might be better than protecting her from usefulness. I'll ask her, Eliza said, but only if she wants to. Fair enough. Eliza left him standing in the hallway and made her way back to the guest room where her daughters were waking up. Rose was sitting up in bed, looking fragile but alert. Margaret was braiding Lily's hair while Lily chattered about the chickens she'd fed yesterday. "Mama," Rose reached for her. "I'm hungry." The words were simple, ordinary, but they meant everything. Meant Rose was healing, was coming back to herself. "Then let's get you some breakfast," Eliza said, gathering her youngest daughter carefully. "And after that, we're going to talk about what happens next." Because for the first time since Thomas died, what happens next felt like something other than disaster. It felt like possibility. The possibility lasted exactly 2 weeks. 14 days during which Rose grew stronger, her cheeks regaining color and her laughter returning in small, precious bursts. 14 days during which Margaret and Lily attended the ranch schoolhouse with the other children, coming home each afternoon with stories about arithmetic lessons and spelling bees. 14 days during which Eliza worked alongside Mrs. Chen, learning the rhythms of running a household that fed 60 people 3 times a day. And 14 days during which Noah spoke more and more, his silence breaking apart like ice in spring thaw. It happened gradually, then all at once. The morning after Noah's first words, Eliza had returned to his room as promised. She'd sat with him in comfortable quiet, and after nearly an hour he'd asked her a question about her daughters, then another. By the end of the week he was talking in full sentences, and by the end of the second week he'd started venturing out of his room. Lily had been the catalyst for that particular breakthrough. She'd appeared one morning with a handful of wildflowers she'd found growing near the creek bed, scraggly, drought-stressed things that shouldn't have been blooming at all. "These are for you," she'd announced to Noah, marching into his room with the confidence of someone who'd never learned to fear rejection. "Mama says flowers make people feel better when they're sad." Noah had stared at the wilted bouquet for a long moment before accepting it carefully, as if it might break. "Thank you," he'd whispered. "You're welcome. Do you want to see where I found them? There's a whole patch, but they're dying because nobody's watering them. I could show you how to help them if you want." And just like that, Noah had followed her outside. Eliza had watched from the window as her 7-year-old daughter led the grieving boy to the creek bed, talking the entire time about soil moisture and root systems and how plants were like people. They needed care and attention, or they'd shrivel up and die. Noah had listened with the intensity of someone discovering something vital, and when Lily had handed him a small watering can, he'd taken it like she was offering him salvation. By the end of that first day, Noah had watered every struggling plant within 100 yards of the main house. By the end of the week, he and Lily were inseparable, 2 children bound by the shared language of growing things. Caleb had watched it happen with an expression Eliza couldn't quite read, something between relief and pain, gratitude and grief. His nephew was coming back to life, but it was happening because of strangers, not family. Because of a 7-year-old girl with dirt under her fingernails and an endless supply of patient kindness. "Your daughter's a miracle worker," Caleb had told Eliza one evening as they'd watched Noah and Lily transplanting seedlings in the kitchen garden. "She's just being herself. Children are better at healing each other than adults are." "Maybe." Caleb had been quiet for a moment. "Or maybe some people are just born knowing how to bring life to dead things." The words had stayed with Eliza, heavy with meaning she wasn't quite ready to examine. But the peace couldn't last. She'd known that intellectually, even as she'd allowed herself to fall into the rhythms of ranch life, known that Richard wouldn't just let her disappear, wouldn't allow her to slip away from his control without consequences. She just hadn't expected him to move so quickly. It was a Thursday morning, 2 weeks and 3 days after they'd arrived at Mercer Ranch. Eliza was in the main house kitchen with Mrs. Chen, reviewing the supply inventory and planning the next week's menus. Rose was napping in the guest room, finally healthy enough that Dr. Carter had reduced his visits to every other day. Margaret and Lily were at school. Noah was with Jacob, learning about the horses. Everything was normal, peaceful, safe. And then hoofbeats thundered into the yard, followed by shouting. Mrs. Chen looked up sharply. "That's trouble." They moved to the window together. In the yard, a group of 5 men had dismounted, Richard Harper at the center, flanked by 4 others Eliza didn't recognize. One wore a sheriff's badge. The others looked like hired muscle, the kind of men who got paid to intimidate rather than think. Eliza's blood went cold. No, no, he can't be here. He is here. Mrs. Chen's voice was grim. Stay inside. Let Mr. Mercer handle this. But Caleb was still recovering from his injuries, still moving carefully to avoid aggravating his broken ribs. And Richard had brought a sheriff and 3 armed men. Whatever he'd come for, he'd come prepared for resistance. Eliza couldn't hide. Not this time. She pushed past Mrs. Chen and out onto the porch, arriving just as Caleb emerged from the barn with Jacob at his side. The foreman's hand was resting casually on his gun belt, not threatening, but ready. Richard saw her and smiled. It was the same smile he'd worn at Thomas's funeral, satisfied and cruel. There she is, my runaway sister-in-law. Eliza's not running from anything, Caleb said, his voice cold and level. She's a guest on my property. You're trespassing, Harper. State your business or leave. Richard's smile widened. My business is with Mrs. Harper and her daughters. I've come to collect them. Collect them? Eliza found her voice, though it shook with fury. We're not property to be collected. According to the court, you are. Richard pulled a folded document from his jacket. Or rather, the girls are. As their legal guardian and closest male relative, I have custody, especially given that they're currently residing in an unmarried man's household. He let the implication hang in the air, ugly and deliberate. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Let me see that document. The sheriff stepped forward, a heavy-set man with a weak chin and eyes that wouldn't quite meet anyone's gaze. I verified it, Mr. Mercer. Everything's in order. Court awarded temporary custody to Mr. Harper pending an investigation into the welfare of the children. Investigation? Eliza's voice cracked. What investigation? My daughters are healthy and safe and living in sin under the roof of a man you're not married to, Richard interrupted smoothly, exposing them to improper influences. The court agrees that's not a suitable environment for young girls. So I'm here to take them somewhere more appropriate. For their own good, of course. The words were lies wrapped in legal language, and everyone standing in that yard knew it, but the sheriff's presence made it real, made it dangerous. Richard had found a way to weaponize the law itself. Caleb read the document slowly, his face carved from stone. When he finally looked up, his voice was arctic. This is backdated, the seal's forged, and Judge Morrison, in Copper Hollow, has no jurisdiction over custody matters. That falls under county court jurisdiction, which is Judge Wallace in Red River Crossing. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Harper assured me, Mr. Harper is a liar and a forger. Caleb's words cut like a whip. And you're either corrupt or incompetent. Either way, you're not taking these children anywhere based on fraudulent paperwork. Richard's pleasant expression finally cracked, showing the rage beneath. You don't get to decide that, Mercer. I have legal standing. I have custody papers. I have a lawman backing me up. What do you have? A woman who abandoned her home and exposed her sick child to the elements? A ranch hand who thinks he can play savior? I have the truth, Caleb said quietly, and resources you can't match. My lawyers are already dismantling every lie you've told, Harper. It's only a matter of time before the whole rotten structure comes down on your head. Time. Richard's smile returned, sharper now. That's the problem, isn't it? Time works in my favor. Every day those girls stay here under questionable circumstances. Every day you harbor my sister-in-law without legal standing. Every day that passes strengthens my case that you're all acting inappropriately. So we can do this the easy way. He gestured to the men behind him. Or we can do it the hard way. The 3 hired men moved their hands to their weapons, not drawing, not threatening overtly, but making their presence unmistakably clear. Jacob's hand tightened on his own gun. From the barn and the bunkhouse, Eliza saw more ranch hands emerging, drawn by the commotion. The air itself seemed to thicken with the possibility of violence. You want a war, Harper. Caleb's voice was soft, deadly. Because I promise you, it's one you'll lose. Will I? Richard's confidence never wavered. You're one man, Mercer. Rich, powerful, sure. But you're not above the law. And the law says those children are mine to protect until a proper custody hearing can be arranged, which, given the current docket in Red River Crossing, won't happen for at least 3 months. So either hand them over now, or I'll have the sheriff here arrest Mrs. Harper for custodial interference and take the girls by force. Your choice. The world seemed to stop. Eliza couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears. This couldn't be happening, not after everything they'd survived, not after Rose had finally started to heal, not after she'd finally found a place where her daughters could laugh again. She looked at Caleb and saw calculation in his eyes, weighing options, assessing odds, trying to find a way out of an impossible situation. But there was no way out. Richard had planned too well, had stacked the deck too thoroughly. "Mama?" The small voice cut through the tension like a knife. Everyone turned to see Margaret standing in the doorway of the schoolhouse, Lily beside her. They must have heard the commotion and come running. Margaret's face was pale but composed, her young features set in grim understanding. "Go back inside, sweetheart," Eliza called, trying to keep her voice steady. "Everything's fine." "No, it isn't." Margaret walked forward with the terrible dignity of a child forced to grow up too fast. "That's Uncle Richard. He's come to take us away." "Margaret." "He can't, though." Margaret looked directly at Richard, and Eliza saw Thomas in her daughter's serious eyes, in her stubborn jaw. "We don't want to go with you. Our mama wants us to stay here, so we're staying." Richard's expression softened into something that might have looked like kindness to someone who didn't know better. "Sweet girl, I know this is confusing, but your mother isn't making good choices right now. She's not thinking clearly. I'm trying to help. I'm trying to make sure you and your sisters are safe and proper." "We are safe," Lily piped up, moving to stand beside her older sister. "We're safer here than we ever were with you around. You're mean and scary, and you lie about everything." Richard's mask slipped for just a moment, showing naked fury before he smoothed it away. "You see, Sheriff? The children have been poisoned against their own family. This is exactly the kind of inappropriate influence I was worried about." The sheriff looked deeply uncomfortable, but nodded. "We should probably collect the girls now, Mr. Harper, before things get more complicated." "Don't you dare touch my daughters." Eliza's voice was low, dangerous. She moved to stand between Richard and her children, every muscle in her body coiled to fight. "You're not taking them. I don't care what your forged papers say. I don't care if you've bought a sheriff. You're not taking my children." "Eliza." Caleb's voice was a warning. "Don't do this. Not this way." "Then what way?" She whirled on him, desperation making her reckless. "What other way is there? Let him take them? Let him drag my daughters back to Copper Hollow and lock them in that cottage while he—" Her voice broke. No, I won't let it happen." "You don't have a choice," Richard said, and now the cruelty was open, undisguised. "You had a choice 2 weeks ago when you could have accepted my generous offer. You chose pride instead. You chose to run. Now you live with the consequences." He nodded to his men. Two of them moved forward, reaching for Margaret and Lily. What happened next occurred in a blur of motion. Jacob drew his weapon, and instantly the other ranch hands followed suit. Richard's hired guns responded in kind. The sheriff was shouting something about law and order. Margaret was screaming, and Eliza threw herself at the nearest man, reaching for her daughters, her hands curled into claws, her voice torn from her throat in a wordless howl of rage and terror. "Stop!" The command cracked through the chaos like a gunshot. Everyone froze. Caleb had moved between the armed groups, his body deliberately positioned in the line of fire, his face carved from granite. "Everyone lower your weapons, now!" For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Jacob lowered his gun. The ranch hands followed. Richard's men took longer, waiting for their employer's signal, but eventually they complied too. Caleb turned to Richard, and his voice was soft, precise, absolutely lethal. "You made a mistake coming here like this, Harper. You made a mistake thinking you could strong-arm me on my own land. And you made a mistake thinking I'd let you take those children based on forged documents and a bought sheriff." He paused. "But you're right about one thing. The law is the law, even when it's been corrupted. So here's what's going to happen." He pulled out a pocket watch, checked the time deliberately. "It's 10:30 on Thursday morning. You're going to get back on your horses and leave my property. You're going to go back to whatever hole you crawled out of in Copper Hollow, and you're going to wait." "Wait for what?" Richard's voice was tight with anger, barely contained. "For my lawyers to finish tearing apart your fabricated custody claim. For the real county court to hear the case. For everyone with eyes to see exactly what kind of man you are." Caleb's smile was cold, sharp as a blade. "I'm giving you one chance to back down before this gets uglier than you can imagine. Take it. Richard laughed, but it sounded forced. You're bluffing. You can't fight legal custody papers, no matter how many lawyers you hire. Can't I? Caleb's voice dropped even lower. I own half this territory, Harper. I know judges, politicians, lawmen, real lawmen, not bought ones like your friend here. I've got resources that make your entire scheme look like a child's game. And more than that, I've got something you'll never have. What's that? People who'll ride through hell for me because I've earned their loyalty instead of buying it. Caleb gestured to the ranch hand still standing ready. You came here with 4 men. I've got 60, and every single one of them would die before letting you take those children. So ask yourself, is this really the hill you want to die on? The silence stretched. Richard's face had gone red, his hands clenched into fists. But underneath the rage, Eliza saw something else. Calculation. He was weighing odds, assessing whether forcing the issue now was worth the cost. This isn't over, Richard said finally, his voice shaking. Those children are legally mine. That woman is living in sin under your roof. I'll bring this before every court in Texas if I have to, and when I'm done, you'll wish you'd handed them over quietly. I don't make wishes, Harper. I make things happen. Caleb's expression was carved from ice. Now get off my property before I have you removed. Richard stared at him for a long, tense moment. Then he turned to the sheriff. Let's go. We'll file formal charges and return with proper backing. Charges for what? Caleb's voice was almost curious. Custodial interference, harboring, contributing to the delinquency of minors, improper cohabitation. Richard counted them off like he'd been planning this list for days. By the time I'm done, you'll be so buried in legal troubles you won't have time to run this ranch, let alone play hero to my brother's widow. Looking forward to it. Caleb's tone was mild, but his eyes were pure steel. Richard mounted his horse, his men following suit. The bought sheriff looked relieved to be leaving. As they turned to ride out, Richard pulled his horse alongside Eliza. This is your last chance, he said quietly, for her ears only. Come back with me now. Accept what I'm offering, and I'll drop everything. You and the girls can live peacefully in the cottage. But if you stay here, if you keep fighting, I'll destroy you. I'll destroy him. And those girls will end up in an orphanage when the courts decide neither of you is fit to care for them. Is that really what you want? Eliza met his eyes without flinching. I want you gone. Richard's face twisted with something ugly. You'll regret this. I already regret ever being civil to you at my husband's funeral. Everything after that is just details. For a moment she thought he might strike her, but Caleb had moved closer and Jacob's hand was back on his gun. Richard settled for a look of pure venom before spurring his horse forward. The group rode out in a cloud of dust and barely suppressed rage, leaving silence in their wake. The moment they disappeared from sight, Eliza's legs gave out. She would have collapsed if Caleb hadn't caught her, his hand strong and steady despite his own injuries. I've got you, he murmured. You're all right. They're gone. For now. Eliza's voice was shaking. But he's right, isn't he? He'll come back. He'll bring more legal troubles, more corruption, more pressure. He won't stop until... Neither will I. Caleb's voice was firm. He wants a legal battle? He'll get one. My lawyers are the best in the territory, and they've already found cracks in his story. We just need time. Time for what? Eliza pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. Time for him to convince some judge that I'm an unfit mother? Time for him to paint you as someone taking advantage of a desperate widow? Time for my daughters to be taken anyway, just through different channels? Margaret and Lily had run to her now, clinging to her skirts and crying. Eliza gathered them close, her heart breaking at their fear. This was supposed to be over. They were supposed to be safe here, but Richard had found them anyway, and he'd come armed with the law itself. Mama, I don't want to go with Uncle Richard, Lily sobbed. Please don't make us go. I won't, baby. I promise. But even as she said it, Eliza didn't know if it was a promise she could keep. Noah had appeared from somewhere, his small face frightened and confused. He went straight to Caleb, who lifted the boy up despite the obvious pain it caused his ribs. Are they leaving? Noah asked in a small voice. Are Lily and Margaret leaving? No, Caleb said firmly. They're staying right here. But that man said, that man is a liar. And we don't listen to liars, do we? Noah shook his head, but his eyes were unconvinced. He'd already lost too much to truly believe that people could stay. Mrs. Chen emerged from the house, her expression grim. Everyone inside, now. There's been enough spectacle for one morning. They filed into the main house like refugees from a battle, which Eliza supposed they were. Mrs. Chen herded the children into the kitchen with promises of fresh cookies, while Eliza and Caleb retreated to his office. The room was masculine and spare, dominated by a heavy desk covered in ranch ledgers and correspondence. Caleb lowered himself into his chair with a grimace, gesturing for Eliza to sit across from him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I'm sorry," Eliza said finally. "I brought this to your door. Richard is my problem, not yours. He became my problem the moment you saved my life." Caleb's voice was flat, brooking no argument. "And even if that weren't true, what he's doing is wrong. I don't tolerate wrong when I can fix it." "Can you fix this?" Eliza's voice was small. "Really? Or are we just delaying the inevitable?" Caleb leaned back in his chair, studying her with those dark, assessing eyes. "What Richard said about improper cohabitation, about you living here unmarried, that's the angle he's going to push hardest. It's the one that'll gain the most traction with conservative judges." "I know." Eliza had been trying not to think about it, but the truth was inescapable. A widow living under the roof of an unmarried man, no matter how innocent the circumstances, was scandalous. Add children to the mix, and it became grounds for custody challenges. "Maybe I should leave, find somewhere else to—" "Where?" Caleb's voice was sharp. "You've got no money, no home, no legal standing anywhere in the territory. Richard's already poisoned Copper Hollow against you. Where exactly would you go that would be better than here?" Eliza had no answer because there was no answer. She was trapped between impossible options: stay and risk losing her daughters to scandal, or leave and lose them to poverty. "There is one solution," Caleb said slowly, carefully. "One way to completely neutralize Richard's legal standing and protect the girls at the same time." Eliza looked up sharply. "What?" "Marry me." The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock in every direction. Eliza stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "Marry me," Caleb repeated, his voice steady and businesslike. "A legal marriage properly documented and witnessed. It solves every problem Richard's trying to create. You'd be respectably married, the girls would have a stable home with a male guardian, and Richard would have no legal grounds for custody claims." "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." Caleb leaned forward, his expression intent. "This is a practical solution to a practical problem. You need protection from Richard's legal maneuvering. I need—" He stopped, something flickering across his face too quickly to read. "I need someone who can help with Noah. Someone who understands this ranch and can run it properly. Someone strong enough to weather what's coming." "You're talking about a business arrangement." Eliza's voice was hollow. "I'm talking about a partnership. A real one, with clear terms and mutual benefit." Caleb's eyes didn't waver. "I'm not offering romance or love, or any of the things women usually want from marriage. I'm offering security, protection, and a home for you and your daughters. In exchange, you'd help manage the household, continue working with Noah, and be a proper wife in all the ways that matter legally and socially." "In all the ways that matter legally," Eliza repeated slowly. "But not, this would be a marriage of convenience, Mrs. Harper. Nothing more. You'd have your own rooms, your own space. I'm not looking for a bed partner. I'm looking for an ally." The clinical way he described it should have been reassuring. Instead, it made Eliza's chest ache with something she couldn't name. "People will talk anyway. They'll say you're taking advantage, that I'm—" "Let them talk. I don't care what people say. I care about what's legal and what's effective." Caleb's voice was hard. "This is both. Marry me, and Richard loses every weapon he's holding. Stay unmarried, and he'll use the scandal to destroy both of us." Eliza's mind was reeling. Marriage. To a man she'd known for 2 weeks. A man who was offering her survival wrapped in legal contracts instead of affection. It was insane. It was also her only real option. "I can't ask you to do this," she whispered. "To tie yourself to me and my problems for what? Gratitude? Obligation? You're not asking. I'm offering." Caleb's expression softened fractionally. And it's not just gratitude, Eliza. You've proven yourself valuable in the time you've been here. Mrs. Chen says you've cut her workload in half. Noah's healing because of you and your daughter. The other hands respect you. You've earned a place here that has nothing to do with owing me anything. But marriage is a legal contract, one that benefits both of us. Caleb stood, moving to the window that overlooked the ranch yard. I'm 36 years old. I've never married because I've never found anyone I trusted enough to share power with. The women who wanted me wanted the ranch, the money, the status. They didn't want the work, the responsibility, the brutal reality of what it takes to keep a place like this running. He turned to face her, and for the first time Eliza saw something raw in his expression. You want the work. You understand the responsibility, and you've already proven you won't run when things get hard. That's rarer than you know. And when Richard's threat is gone, when there's no more legal pressure, what then? Then we have a working partnership that keeps this ranch running and keeps your daughters safe. Unless you'd rather dissolve it at that point, I won't hold you to anything you don't want. The offer was almost too practical to be real. And yet, standing there in his office with the memory of Richard's threat still fresh, Eliza couldn't find a better alternative. Every other path led to losing her daughters, either to Richard's custody or to poverty and desperation. This path, this impossible, practical, emotionless path, led to safety. I need time to think, she said finally. You have until Richard files his formal charges, which, based on his threat level, will probably be tomorrow. Caleb's voice was matter-of-fact. After that, the scandal exists whether we marry or not. Better to get ahead of it. And if I say no, then I'll fight for you and your daughters anyway. It'll just be harder, messier, and less certain. Caleb met her eyes steadily. But I meant what I said, Eliza. I don't let people who show up for me fall into ruin. Whether you marry me or not, you're under my protection now. The question is whether you want to make that protection legally unassailable. Eliza wanted to cry, or scream, or both. Instead, she stood up on shaking legs and moved to the door. I'll give you an answer tonight. That's all I ask. She left him standing by the window and went to find her daughters. They were in the kitchen with Mrs. Chen eating cookies and trying to pretend everything was normal. Rose had woken from her nap and was sitting with them, oblivious to the morning's drama. Margaret looked up as Eliza entered, her eyes too old for her 9 years. Is Uncle Richard really going to take us away? No, baby. I won't let that happen. But how can you stop him? He has papers and a sheriff, and I'll find a way. Eliza knelt down so she was eye level with her eldest daughter. I promise you, Margaret, whatever I have to do, I'll keep you safe, all of you. Margaret studied her face for a long moment, then quietly, would you marry Mr. Mercer? If it would keep us safe? The question shouldn't have surprised Eliza. Margaret saw and understood far too much, but it still caught her off guard. Would that bother you, if I did? Papa's been gone 4 months, Margaret said carefully. And you loved him so much you nearly broke when he died. But he's not coming back, Mama, and we need help. We need protection. If Mr. Mercer can give us that— She trailed off, then added, he's kind to Noah. And he was kind to you when he didn't have to be. That counts for something. Out of the mouths of children, Eliza thought. Sometimes they saw the truth more clearly than adults ever could. That night, after her daughters were asleep, Eliza stood in the dark guest room and made her decision. She thought about Thomas, about the life they'd built and lost. She thought about Richard and his forged documents and his cruel smile. She thought about her daughters, who deserved safety and stability and a chance to be children instead of casualties. And she thought about Caleb Mercer, offering her a partnership without pretense, protection without romance, a future built on mutual benefit instead of love. It wasn't what she'd wanted. It wasn't what she'd dreamed of when she was young and foolish and believed in fairy tales. But it was what she needed, and sometimes needing was enough. She found Caleb in his office, working late over ranch ledgers despite the hour. He looked up as she entered, his expression carefully neutral. I have my answer, Eliza said quietly. And? Yes, I'll marry you. The words felt strange in her mouth, too big and too small at the same time, on one condition. Name it. My daughters come first, always. In every decision, every choice, every moment, they come first. If you can't promise me that, then all of this is pointless. Caleb stood, crossing to where she waited by the door. He extended his hand and she took it, feeling the calluses and strength that matched her own. I promise, he said simply. Your daughters come first, always. They shook on it like business partners sealing a deal, because that's exactly what they were. They were married 3 days later in the ranch's small chapel, with Mrs. Chen and Jacob Worth as witnesses. No fanfare, no celebration, just a brief ceremony conducted by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through the territory and asked no uncomfortable questions about the speed of the arrangement. Eliza wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen had altered to fit her. Caleb wore his Sunday clothes, his face serious and composed as he spoke the vows. The whole thing took less than 15 minutes. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Caleb shook Eliza's hand instead of kissing her. Margaret, Lily, and Rose watched from the front pew, their expressions ranging from solemn to confused to delighted. Noah sat beside them, holding Lily's hand and looking uncertain about what any of it meant. "You're really married now?" Lily asked afterward, her voice pitched loud in the quiet chapel. "Does that mean Mr. Mercer is our papa?" Eliza's throat tightened. "Mr. Mercer is your stepfather now, but he's not replacing your papa. Nobody could do that. Can we call him Uncle Caleb instead?" Margaret's practical voice cut through the awkwardness. "Since he's family now, but not our father." Caleb looked at Eliza, letting her make the decision. She nodded gratefully. "Uncle Caleb works fine," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "If that's what you're comfortable with." The legal documents were filed that same afternoon. By evening, word had spread throughout the ranch that Caleb Mercer had married the widow who'd saved his life. The reactions ranged from surprise to approval to a few raised eyebrows from the older hands who remembered Caleb swearing he'd never marry. But nobody questioned it to their faces. Caleb Mercer's personal business was his own, and the people who worked for him had learned long ago not to pry. Richard Harper received word of the marriage 2 days later when Caleb's lawyers delivered a formal notice along with a restraining order preventing him from approaching Eliza or her daughters without court supervision. The custody papers Richard had filed were challenged immediately on grounds of fraud and forgery. The bought sheriff from Copper Hollow found himself under investigation by the territorial marshal. Richard's careful house of cards began to collapse. But the marriage itself, the reality of living as Caleb Mercer's wife, was stranger than Eliza had imagined. True to his word, Caleb gave her separate quarters, a spacious bedroom connected to his own by a shared sitting room, but otherwise completely private. Her daughters slept in an adjoining room, close enough that Eliza could hear them breathing at night. The household accepted the change with surprising ease. Mrs. Chen began deferring to Eliza on domestic decisions, treating her as the lady of the house rather than a temporary guest. The ranch hands called her Mrs. Mercer and tipped their hats when she passed. The children at the schoolhouse called Margaret, Lily, and Rose the Mercer girls within a week. It was like putting on someone else's life. It fit reasonably well, but never quite felt like her own. Caleb maintained a careful distance. They took meals together, discussed ranch business in the evenings, presented a united front to the world. But there was an invisible line between them, one neither crossed. He never entered her private rooms uninvited, never touched her beyond what was necessary for public appearances, never suggested the marriage should be anything other than what they'd agreed upon. It should have been a relief. Instead, it left Eliza feeling oddly hollow, like she was living in a beautifully appointed cage. "You're being ridiculous," she told herself one morning while getting dressed. "You have everything you needed: safety, security, a home for your daughters. What more could you possibly want?" But the question lingered anyway, unanswered and uncomfortable. The drought, meanwhile, continued to tighten its grip on the land. By the end of the 3rd week, the water situation had become critical. 2 of the new wells Caleb had commissioned ran dry within days of being dug. The remaining creeks were reduced to muddy trickles. Cattle that had been thriving began to show signs of stress, their ribs becoming visible beneath dusty hides. Caleb spent 18-hour days managing the crisis, rationing water, moving livestock to better grazing areas, negotiating with neighboring ranchers for access to their water sources. He came home each night exhausted and covered in dust, ate whatever Mrs. Chen put in front of him, and disappeared into his office to work on ledgers and correspondence until well past midnight. Eliza watched him burning himself out and recognized the pattern. Thomas had done the same thing during his illness, pushing himself past reasonable limits because admitting he needed help felt like admitting defeat. "He's going to collapse," she told Mrs. Chen one evening while preparing dinner. "He's still recovering from broken ribs, and he's working like he has something to prove." "He does have something to prove," Mrs. Chen's voice was matter-of-fact. "Every rancher within 100 miles is watching to see if Caleb Mercer can hold his operation together through a crisis while managing a new wife and family. They're waiting for him to fail. That's barbaric. That's business. And ranching. And men." Mrs. Chen shrugged. "Best you can do is make sure he eats properly and doesn't kill himself from stubbornness. Though stopping a stubborn man from being stubborn is like stopping the wind from blowing." That night, when Caleb dragged himself home at nearly 11 o'clock, Eliza was waiting in his office with a plate of food and a pot of coffee. He stopped in the doorway, surprise flickering across his exhausted face. "You should be asleep." "So should you." Eliza gestured to the desk she'd cleared of papers. "Eat first. Work second. That's non-negotiable." Non-negotiable," she repeated firmly. "You're running yourself into the ground, and it's not helping anyone, especially not the ranch you're trying so hard to save." For a moment, she thought he'd argue. Then his shoulders sagged slightly, and he crossed to the desk and sat down. He ate mechanically, clearly too tired to taste the food but needing the fuel. Eliza poured coffee and handed him the cup. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt the roughness of his calluses, the dried blood on his knuckles from some injury he hadn't bothered to treat. "You're bleeding," she said quietly. Caleb glanced at his hands as if noticing for the first time. "Cut it on some barbed wire earlier. It's nothing. It'll get infected if you don't clean it." Without waiting for permission, Eliza went to the cabinet where she knew the medical supplies were kept. She returned with clean cloth and alcohol, pulled a chair close to his, and reached for his injured hand. He tensed, but didn't pull away. She cleaned the wound carefully, her touch gentle but efficient. The gash wasn't deep, but it was angry and crusted with dirt. "You need to be more careful," she murmured. "I need to fix the north fence line before we lose more cattle to Crawford's land grabbing. Careful doesn't factor into it." "Crawford's the one who cut your fence?" "Can't prove it, but yes. He's been trying to force me to sell that section for years. Figures if he can create enough trouble during a drought, I'll give in just to stop the bleeding." Caleb's jaw tightened. "He's wrong." Eliza wrapped the cleaned wound with practiced efficiency. "What happens if the drought doesn't break? If the wells run dry and the cattle start dying? Then I start selling stock at a loss to reduce numbers. Cut the workforce to essential personnel, tighten operations until we're running on bare bones." His voice was flat, clinical. "The ranch has survived worse. It'll survive this." "And you? Will you survive this?" Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his dark eyes. "Why do you care?" The question caught Eliza off guard. "Because you're my husband. Because my daughter's safety depends on this ranch staying solvent. Because—" She stopped, not quite sure how to finish that sentence. "Because it's your nature to care," Caleb said quietly. "Even when you probably shouldn't. Even when it would be easier not to." "Is that so wrong?" "No, just dangerous. Caring about things gives them power to hurt you." Eliza thought about Thomas, about the 6 months she'd spent watching him die by inches, about the way grief had nearly destroyed her afterward. "I know, but the alternative is worse." "Is it?" Caleb pulled his hand back gently, flexing the bandaged fingers. "Sometimes I think not caring would be the easiest thing in the world. Just let everything wash over you without leaving marks." "You don't believe that?" "No," he admitted. "I don't. But some days I wish I did." They sat in silence for a moment, the night pressing close around them. Through the window, Eliza could see the stars scattered across the black sky, brilliant and cold and indifferent to the struggles of the people below. "Tell me about Noah's mother," she said suddenly. "Your sister. You said her name was Sarah, but that's all I know." Caleb's expression closed off immediately. "Why?" "Because Noah talks about her with Lily, and I hear things, fragments of memories, pieces of stories, but I don't know enough to help him make sense of what he's lost, and I think you're the only one who can tell me." For a long moment, Eliza thought Caleb would refuse. Then he stood and moved to the window, his back to her, his shoulders tense. "Sarah was 8 years younger than me. Our mother died giving birth to her, so I helped raise her. Father was—" He paused, searching for words. "Father was hard. Fair, but hard. He expected perfection from everyone, including a little girl who'd never even met her mother. Sarah struggled with that. She was soft where Father needed people to be steel." "Soft isn't the same as weak," Eliza said quietly. "I know that now. Took me too long to learn it." Caleb's voice was rough with old regret. "Sarah fell in love when she was 18. Sweet man, good heart, absolutely useless at anything practical. Father forbade the marriage, said he wouldn't have his daughter throwing herself away on a dreamer who couldn't support a family. What happened? She married him anyway, ran off to Austin, sent me a letter 6 months later saying she was happy. She didn't speak to Father again before he died." Caleb's hands were clenched on the windowsill. "The husband left her when she got pregnant, just disappeared one day, took their savings, and never came back. Sarah was too proud to ask for help. Worked herself to exhaustion trying to support herself and prepare for the baby." Eliza could see where this was going, and her heart ached for it. "When Noah was born, there were complications. Sarah hemorrhaged. The midwife couldn't stop it, and by the time they got a real doctor, it was too late." Caleb's voice had gone flat, emotionless. "Noah was holding her hand when she died. 5 years old, watching his mother bleed out, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Oh, Caleb. I brought him here afterward, thought the ranch, the open space, the structure, thought it would help him heal, but he just shut down. Stopped talking, stopped engaging with anything. The doctor said there was nothing physically wrong. It was grief and trauma, locked up so tight inside him that it had nowhere to go. Until Eliza and Lily arrived," Mrs. Chen's voice came from the doorway. Neither of them had heard her approach. "Until your wife showed him it was safe to feel again." Caleb turned, and Eliza saw raw pain in his face before he could hide it. "He's healing because of her, because of Lily, not because of anything I did. You kept him safe," Eliza said firmly. "You gave him a home and stability and time. That mattered. It all mattered. Did it?" Caleb's smile was bitter. "Or did I just keep him locked in the same silent prison, not knowing how to help him escape?" Mrs. Chen made a disapproving sound. "Self-pity doesn't suit you, Caleb Mercer. You did what you knew how to do. You're not a woman who understands grief the way women do. You're a man who understands problems and solutions. Noah wasn't a problem you could solve with money or resources or sheer stubborn will. But Eliza could solve it." "Eliza understood it," Mrs. Chen corrected. "There's a difference. She didn't solve Noah's grief. She gave him permission to feel it. That's something that can't be forced or bought. It has to be offered freely by someone who knows what it costs." Caleb looked at Eliza, and in his eyes she saw a question he couldn't quite ask. She wasn't sure she had an answer anyway. Mrs. Chen left as quietly as she'd arrived, leaving them alone again. The silence stretched, heavy with things unsaid. "I should let you get back to work," Eliza said finally, standing. "I just wanted to make sure you ate something." "Eliza," Caleb's voice stopped her at the door. "Thank you for caring, even though it's dangerous." She looked back at him, this complicated man who'd offered her safety without affection, partnership without intimacy. "You're welcome, even though you think I shouldn't." That night, lying in her separate bed in her separate room, Eliza thought about danger and caring and the distance between what people needed and what they allowed themselves to want. She thought about Caleb working himself to exhaustion rather than admitting he needed help. About Noah's grief locked away until Lily offered him permission to feel. About her own careful walls built to protect her heart from being broken again. And she wondered what would happen if any of them were brave enough to let those walls fall. The answer came 2 days later in the form of a crisis that broke open everything they'd been holding closed. It started with Rose. She'd been healthy for weeks now, fully recovered from the scarlet fever and thriving in the ranch's routines. But on Thursday morning, she woke up screaming. Eliza was at her side in seconds, gathering the little girl close. "What's wrong, baby? What hurts?" "My head," Rose sobbed. "It hurts so much, Mama. Make it stop." Eliza's blood went cold. She touched Rose's forehead and found it burning. Not the gradual warmth of a developing fever, but the immediate dangerous heat of something wrong. "Mrs. Chen!" Eliza's shout brought the housekeeper running. "Get Dr. Carter, now!" Within an hour, the doctor was there, examining Rose with increasingly grave expressions. The fever had spiked to dangerous levels despite every cooling measure Eliza employed. Rose was delirious, crying out for her father, thrashing against invisible threats. "It's not scarlet fever relapse," Dr. Carter said grimly. "This is something else. Meningitis, possibly, or brain fever. I've seen it before. Comes on fast and hard, especially in children who've recently been weakened by other illnesses." "Can you treat it?" Eliza's voice was barely more than a whisper. "I can try, but I won't lie to you, Mrs. Mercer. This kind of fever in a child this young, the odds aren't good. We need to keep her cool, keep her hydrated, and hope the fever breaks before it does permanent damage. That's all we can do." Eliza felt the world tilt sideways. She'd survived Thomas's death, survived Richard's betrayal, survived being thrown out with nothing. But losing Rose, watching her baby die after fighting so hard to save her, that would break her in ways she couldn't recover from. "I'll stay with her," she said numbly. "However long it takes." Dr. Carter nodded. "I'll check back every few hours. If anything changes, anything at all, send for me immediately." The day passed in a nightmare blur. Eliza sponged Rose's burning skin with cool water, forced drops of liquid between her cracked lips, held her through violent shaking and terrible stillness. Margaret and Lily were kept away, their young faces frightened and confused. Noah clung to Lily, both children silent with fear. Caleb appeared in the doorway sometime around sunset, his face drawn. "Dr. Carter told me. What can I do?" "Pray," Eliza said without looking up from Rose's flushed face. "If you know how to do that, pray." He stood there for a moment, helpless in the face of something his money and power couldn't fix. Then he left, and Eliza was alone again with her dying daughter. Night fell. The fever didn't break. Rose's breathing became labored, her small chest rising and falling with terrible effort. Her skin was so hot it hurt to touch, but Eliza kept touching her anyway, kept cooling her, kept whispering wordless comfort into the darkness. "Please," Eliza whispered to no one and everyone. "Please don't take her. She's 4 years old. She's just a baby. Please." The night stretched endlessly. Somewhere around midnight, Caleb returned with coffee and food Eliza couldn't eat. He sat in the corner of the room, silent and watchful, keeping vigil with her. "You don't have to stay," Eliza said, her voice hoarse from crying and whispering. "Yes, I do." "Why?" "Because you shouldn't be alone with this. Nobody should be alone with this." At 2 a.m, Rose's breathing changed, became shallower, more erratic. Eliza's heart clenched with terror. This was how Thomas had sounded in his final hours, the same terrible pattern of breath failing. "No, no, please, Rose, baby, stay with me. Please stay with me." Caleb was beside her suddenly, his hand warm and solid on her shoulder. "She's strong. She fought off scarlet fever. She can fight this too." "She's 4 years old. She's so small. How much can one little girl fight?" "As much as her mother taught her to." Caleb's voice was firm. "She's your daughter, Eliza. She's got your strength in her. She'll fight." Eliza wanted to believe him, but hope felt like a luxury she couldn't afford, not with Rose's breathing getting weaker with each passing minute. At 4 a.m, Eliza's eyes were closing despite her desperate attempts to stay awake. She'd been sitting vigil for nearly 20 hours, and her body was shutting down whether she wanted it to or not. "Sleep," Caleb said quietly. "I'll watch her. If anything changes, I'll wake you immediately." "I can't." "You can and you will. You'll be no good to Rose if you collapse from exhaustion." His voice gentled. "Trust me with this. Please." Eliza was too tired to argue. She curled up on the other side of Rose's bed, her hand resting on her daughter's burning arm, and fell into dark, dreamless sleep. She woke to dawn, light, and silence. For one terrible moment, she thought Rose had died while she slept. Then she felt the small chest rising and falling beneath her hand, slower than before, but steady. She looked up and met Caleb's eyes across the bed. "The fever broke an hour ago," he said quietly. "Not completely, but it's lower. Dr. Carter came by at 5 to check on her. He says if she makes it through today without the fever spiking again, she'll likely recover fully." Eliza touched Rose's forehead and felt warmth instead of fire. Relief hit her so hard she couldn't breathe for a moment. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying, for watching her when I couldn't." "You don't have to thank me for caring about your daughter." Caleb's eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, his face haggard. He'd stayed awake all night keeping watch while Eliza slept. "She's part of this family now. That means something." "Does it?" Eliza heard the question escape before she could stop it. "We've been married 3 weeks, Caleb. We barely know each other. This arrangement we have, it's practical, convenient, mutually beneficial. But is it family?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know what family is supposed to feel like. My father was distant. My mother died before I could remember her. Sarah was the closest I had to real family, and I failed her when she needed me most. So no, I don't know if what we have is family in the traditional sense." He paused, his eyes still on Rose's sleeping face. "But I know that when Dr. Carter told me Rose might die, something in my chest went hollow. I know that sitting here all night watching her breathe felt like the most important thing I've ever done. I know that the thought of telling you she didn't make it, that was worse than any business failure or drought or cattle loss I've ever faced." Eliza felt tears burning in her eyes. "Caleb, so maybe I don't know what family is supposed to feel like, but I know that what I feel for Rose, for Noah, for your other daughters, it's real. And what I feel when I watch you sacrifice yourself to save them." He stopped, something raw and unguarded in his expression. "That's real too." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was quite ready to examine. Before Eliza could respond, Rose stirred, her eyes opening slowly. "Mama?" Her voice was weak but clear. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Eliza gathered her daughter carefully, relief and love overwhelming everything else. Rose's eyes found Caleb. "Uncle Caleb stayed too." "I did." "Like a real family," Rose murmured, already drifting back to sleep. Caleb and Eliza looked at each other across the bed, and something shifted between them, some invisible line blurring, some careful distance shrinking. Not gone entirely, but changing into something neither of them had expected. "She's right," Eliza said quietly. "Like a real family." Caleb's expression was unreadable, but his voice was soft when he spoke. "Yeah, like a real family." That afternoon, with Rose sleeping peacefully and the fever continuing to drop, Eliza finally allowed herself to step outside. The ranch was bustling with activity despite the ongoing drought. She found Lily and Noah in the vegetable garden, working together to water the struggling plants. "Mama!" Lily jumped up, her face streaked with dirt and worry. "Is Rose—" "She's going to be fine, sweetheart. The fever broke. She's sleeping now." Lily's relief was visible, her whole body sagging. Noah, however, had gone very still, his small hands clenched around the watering can. "She's really okay?" he asked in a small voice. "She's not going to die like my mama did?" Eliza knelt down beside him. "She's really okay. I promise." Noah's face crumpled. "I was so scared. I thought if Rose died, Lily would be sad like I was. And I didn't want her to be sad. I didn't want anyone to be that sad ever again." Lily dropped her gardening tools and threw her arms around Noah. "I'm not sad. Rose is better. Everything's better now." Watching them, Eliza felt something settle in her chest, some piece of the puzzle she hadn't known was missing clicking into place. These children, bound by loss and healing. This ranch, harsh and beautiful and unforgiving. This impossible marriage that had started as a business arrangement and was becoming something she didn't have words for yet. It wasn't what she'd planned. Wasn't what she'd dreamed of back when life was simple and Thomas was alive and the future felt predictable. But maybe, just maybe, it was what she needed after all. That night, after everyone was asleep and the ranch had settled into quiet darkness, Eliza found Caleb in his office again. He looked up as she entered, surprise and something else flickering across his face. "Rose is resting comfortably," Eliza said. "Dr. Carter says she should make a full recovery." "That's good news?" "Yes." Eliza moved closer, her heart pounding with a courage she hadn't known she possessed. "Caleb, what you said this morning, about what you feel, did you mean it?" His eyes were guarded. "I don't say things I don't mean." "Then I need to tell you something too." Eliza took a breath. "When we got married, I thought this was just survival, a practical solution to an impossible problem. I thought I could keep my heart locked away, protected, safe from ever being broken again. And now? Now I'm not sure I can do that anymore, or that I want to." The words felt dangerous, exposing vulnerabilities she'd sworn to keep hidden. "You showed up for my daughter when you didn't have to. You sat vigil through the night. You care about my children not because you're obligated to, but because you've chosen to. And that matters, Caleb. That matters more than I know how to say." Caleb stood slowly, moving around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her. "This wasn't supposed to get complicated." "I know. We had an agreement, a partnership, clean lines and clear boundaries." "I know that too." "And now?" Eliza met his eyes, seeing her own confusion and fear and desperate hope reflected back at her. "Now I think maybe those boundaries were always an illusion. You can't live in someone's house, raise children together, face crises side by side, and keep your heart completely separate. At least I can't." "What are you saying, Eliza?" "I'm saying I'm tired of pretending this is just a business arrangement. I'm saying that somewhere along the way, this became real for me. And I hope, it became real for you too." The silence stretched between them, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. Then Caleb reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "It became real the moment you crawled under that horse to save me," he said quietly. "I've just been too careful, too controlled to admit it, even to myself. And now I'm admitting it." His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. "I care about you, Eliza. Not because you're convenient or useful or good with the children, but because you're brave and fierce and you fight for what matters. Because you make this house feel like a home instead of just a place. Because when I think about the future, I can't imagine it without you in it." The words pierced straight through every defense Eliza had built. "I loved Thomas. I loved him so much, and losing him nearly destroyed me. I swore I'd never let myself feel that vulnerable again. I know. But I think I'm falling in love with you anyway. And it terrifies me." Caleb's hand tightened on hers. "It terrifies me too. But maybe being terrified together is better than being safe alone." Eliza thought about that, about safety and risk, about walls and vulnerability, about the distance between surviving and truly living. She thought about Thomas and the life they'd built together, now gone but not forgotten. She thought about her daughters and the future they deserved. And she thought about Caleb Mercer, who'd offered her survival and was now offering something infinitely more dangerous and infinitely more precious, the chance to love again. "Yes," she whispered, "better together than alone." He pulled her closer then, slowly enough that she could pull away if she wanted to. But she didn't want to. She let him draw her into an embrace that was careful and tentative and achingly real. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who'd built their lives on strength and self-reliance, learning how to lean on each other instead. Learning that sometimes the bravest thing wasn't fighting alone, but allowing yourself to be helped. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Through the window, Eliza saw dark clouds gathering on the horizon, the first real storm clouds they'd seen in 3 months. The drought was finally about to break. And so, perhaps, were they. The rain came 3 days later, breaking over the ranch like a benediction. It started as scattered drops in the early morning, then built into a steady downpour by noon, then transformed into a torrential storm that lasted through the night and into the next day. The parched earth drank it in desperately, the dry creek beds filling with rushing water, the dying grass beginning to green almost immediately. Eliza stood on the porch watching it fall, Rose tucked against her side. The little girl had recovered fully from the brain fever, though Dr. Carter had warned she'd need to take things slowly for another week. Right now, she was content to watch the rain with wide, wondering eyes. "I've never seen so much water fall from the sky," Rose whispered. "Is it going to rain forever?" "No, baby, but hopefully long enough to save the ranch." The ranch. Eliza had started thinking of it that way somewhere along the line. Not Caleb's ranch or the place where they were staying, but theirs. Home and away her farm with Thomas had never quite been. Perhaps because she'd helped build this life from scratch rather than inheriting it. Caleb emerged from the barn, soaked to the skin and grinning like a man who'd been given a second chance at life. When he saw Eliza and Rose on the porch, he jogged over, his boots splashing through puddles that hadn't existed yesterday. "The south pasture is flooding," he announced, his voice jubilant. "In a good way. We'll have grazing for months once this grass comes in properly." "That's wonderful." Eliza couldn't help smiling at his unguarded joy. This was a Caleb she'd never seen before, open, almost boyish in his relief. "Wonderful doesn't begin to cover it. We were 2 weeks away from having to sell off half the herd at catastrophic losses. Now?" He shook his head, water flying from his hair. "Now we've got a fighting chance." Rose giggled at his enthusiasm. "Uncle Caleb, you're all wet." "I am indeed, Miss Rose, but it's the best kind of wet." He looked at Eliza, and something warm and private passed between them. "We're going to be all right." He wasn't just talking about the ranch. Eliza knew that, felt it in the way he looked at her, like she was something precious he'd almost lost and was grateful to still have. They'd been different since the night of Rose's fever, since they had admitted what was growing between them. Still careful, still learning how to navigate this new territory, but different. The invisible wall between them was dissolving, brick by brick. That afternoon, a rider arrived from Red River Crossing with news that made the rain seem even sweeter. Caleb read the letter in his office while Eliza waited, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread in equal measure. "Richard's custody claim has been dismissed," Caleb said finally, looking up from the paper with grim satisfaction. The judge found evidence of forgery and fraud. The witnesses who supposedly signed his documents have admitted they were paid to lie, and the sheriff who backed him up has been removed from his position pending investigation for corruption. Eliza felt her knees go weak. "It's over? Really over?" "Not completely. There's still the matter of the farm, your original property that Richard stole. But my lawyers have found the real will, the one Thomas actually signed. It was filed with the county clerk's office in Red River Crossing, not in Copper Hollow. Richard either didn't know about that copy or thought he'd buried it deep enough that no one would look." "So the farm is legally mine again?" "Will be, once the court processes the paperwork. Should be finalized within a month." Caleb set the letter down, his expression unreadable. "Which brings up a question we haven't really discussed. What do you want to do about it?" Eliza hadn't let herself think about that possibility, hadn't dared to hope the farm might actually be returned to her. Now that it was real, she found herself uncertain. "I don't know. You could go back, take the girls, reclaim your home, start over where you began." Caleb's voice was carefully neutral, but Eliza heard the tension beneath it. "You'd have legal ownership. No one could take it from you again. You'd be independent." "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" "No." The word came out fierce, almost harsh. "But I won't trap you here either. This marriage started as a convenience, a protection. If you don't need that protection anymore, if you'd rather have your own life back—" Eliza crossed to him and took his hands, stopping the words before they could build into something neither of them wanted. "Caleb, look at me." He did, and in his dark eyes she saw fear. This hard, powerful man who'd built an empire from dust and will, he was afraid she'd choose the farm over him. Afraid he'd lose her now that he'd finally admitted he wanted to keep her. "I don't want the farm," Eliza said quietly. "Not to live in, not to reclaim. Too much pain there, too many ghosts. Thomas is buried there, and every room would remind me of what I lost. I can't build a future in a place that's haunted by the past." "Then what do you want?" "I want to sell it. Use the money to invest in this ranch, in our future, unless—" She hesitated. "Unless you don't want that. Unless you'd rather keep this as your operation, not ours." Caleb pulled her closer, his hands warm and solid on her waist. Eliza Harper Mercer, I want nothing more than for this to be ours. The ranch, the future, all of it. I was just afraid to ask. Why? Because what if you said no? What if you realized that marrying me was just a temporary solution, and now that the crisis is over, you'd rather have your freedom? His voice was raw with vulnerability she'd never heard before. I can't make you stay. I can only hope that what we're building here is enough to make you want to. Eliza thought about the question he'd asked weeks ago, back when this was still just a practical arrangement. She thought about her daughters thriving here, about Noah's healing, about the life they'd begun to build from the wreckage of what they'd lost. And she thought about Caleb, this complicated, careful man who'd offered her safety and was now offering his heart. It's enough, she said firmly. More than enough. This is home now, Caleb. You're home, and I'm not going anywhere. The kiss that followed was nothing like the brief, formal touch of lips at their wedding ceremony. This was real and deep and full of promise. Two people choosing each other not out of necessity, but out of genuine desire to build something lasting together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I love you. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you, Eliza. I love you too. And it terrifies me. But I love you anyway. Good. Being terrified means we're doing something that matters. The sound of children's laughter drifted up from somewhere below, Margaret and Lily and Noah, probably playing in the rain despite Mrs. Chen's protests. The sound was so normal, so full of joy, that it made Eliza's chest ache with gratitude. We should tell them, she said. The girls. That we're choosing each other, that this isn't just an arrangement anymore. How do you think they'll take it? I think Margaret already knows. She sees everything. Lily will be delighted. She's been trying to engineer romance between us since week 2. And Rose, Eliza smiled. Rose already calls you her uncle like you've always been part of the family. I don't think it'll be a shock to any of them. She was right. That evening, when they gathered the children and explained that the marriage was becoming real, that they were choosing to be a family not out of necessity, but out of love, the reactions ranged from satisfied to ecstatic. Finally, Margaret said, her serious face breaking into a rare smile. I was wondering how long it would take you two to figure it out. You knew? Eliza asked, surprised. Mama, I'm 9, not blind. Uncle Caleb looks at you like you hung the moon, and you've been looking at him the same way for weeks. It was obvious. Lily bounced up and down, clapping her hands. Does this mean we get to stay forever? And Uncle Caleb is really our family now? And we can call this home? Yes, to all of that, Caleb confirmed, and Lily launched herself at him in a hug that nearly knocked him over. Rose, still weak from her recent illness, simply smiled and said, Good. I like it here better than the old house anyway. Noah, who'd been listening quietly, looked up at Caleb with something fragile and hopeful in his young face. Does this mean Lily's my sister now? Like for real? For real? Caleb assured him. All of you. You're all family now, officially and permanently. The boy's eyes filled with tears, but he was smiling. I always wanted a sister, and now I have 3. The moment was interrupted by a knock on the door. Jacob Worth stood there, rain dripping from his hat, his expression apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, boss, but we've got a situation. Richard Harper is at the gate demanding to see you and Mrs. Mercer. The warm family moment shattered instantly. Eliza felt her protective instincts surge. Richard was not getting near her daughters. Not now. Not ever. What does he want? Caleb's voice had gone cold, dangerous. Wouldn't say. Just that he has business that needs settling face to face. He's alone this time. No hired guns, no sheriff. Just him and his horse. Caleb looked at Eliza. Your call. We can send him away without seeing him, or we can face him one last time and end this permanently. Eliza thought about running, about hiding, about protecting herself and her children from Richard's poison, but she'd spent too many months being afraid of him, letting him control her life through fear and legal manipulation. It was time to end that. We face him, she said firmly, together, and we end this. Caleb nodded, respect and love clear in his eyes. All right, but the children stay inside with Mrs. Chen. No arguments. The children were hustled away, protesting but ultimately obedient. Then Eliza and Caleb went out to meet Richard Harper one final time. He was waiting in the yard, looking worse than when she'd seen him last. His expensive suit was wrinkled and muddy, his face haggard with strain and sleepless nights. The rain had plastered his hair to his skull, making him look smaller, diminished. Richard, Caleb's voice was flat, emotionless. You've got 5 minutes. Talk. Richard's eyes went to Eliza, and she saw desperation in them. I need to speak with my sister-in-law, privately. Absolutely not, Caleb said. Whatever you have to say, you say it in front of both of us, or you don't say it at all. Fine. Richard's composure cracked slightly. The custody claim is dead, though will fraud is exposed. The sheriff who helped me is being prosecuted. My reputation in Copper Hollow is destroyed. I've lost everything. Good, Eliza said coldly. You deserve to lose everything after what you tried to do. I know. The admission seemed to cost Richard something. I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you, hurt the girls. I was angry after Thomas died, angry that he left everything to you instead of keeping it in the male line of the family. I convinced myself I deserved that farm, that I'd be a better steward of the Harper name than a woman and 3 daughters could be. You forged documents. You tried to steal my children. I know! Richard's voice broke. I know, and I can't undo it, but I can try to make it right. That's why I'm here. He pulled a paper from his jacket, protected from the rain in a leather case. This is the deed to your farm. I'm signing it over to you, free and clear, with no strings attached. I've also liquidated my assets in Copper Hollow and established a trust fund for your daughters. Education, marriages, whatever they need. It's not enough to make up for what I did, but it's all I have left to give. Eliza stared at the paper, then at Richard, searching for the trap. Why would you do this? Because I'm tired. Richard looked older than his years, worn down by guilt and consequences. Tired of fighting, tired of being the villain, tired of waking up knowing I destroyed my own family out of greed and pride. Thomas was a good man. He deserved better than what I did to his memory. And you deserved better than what I tried to take from you. He held out the paper to Eliza. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I am asking you to accept this and let it be the end. Let me try to salvage whatever's left of my soul by doing one decent thing before I leave this territory for good. Eliza took the deed slowly, reading through it carefully. It appeared legitimate, a full transfer of property rights with no hidden clauses or conditions. The trust fund documentation was similarly straightforward, already filed with banks in Red River Crossing. Where will you go? She asked quietly. California, maybe Mexico. Somewhere I can start over without the Harper name following me around like a curse. Richard's smile was bitter. Somewhere I can be nobody, instead of being the man who tried to steal from a widow. Caleb's hand found Eliza's, squeezing gently. The choice was hers to make. Accept Richard's restitution or reject it, forgive or hold on to the anger that was her right. Eliza thought about Thomas, about the kind of man he'd been. He'd believed in second chances, in redemption, in the possibility that people could change if they were willing to do the hard work of becoming better. Richard's crimes were real, and the damage he'd caused was lasting. But standing there in the rain, looking at her brother-in-law's broken face, Eliza found she didn't want to carry the weight of hatred anymore. She'd carried enough weight for too long. I accept, she said finally. The property, the trust fund, all of it. Not because you've earned forgiveness, but because my daughters deserve the security this provides, and because holding on to anger would hurt me more than it would hurt you. Relief flooded Richard's face. Thank you. You're more gracious than I deserve. I know. Eliza's voice was steady. But grace isn't about what people deserve. It's about choosing not to let their worst actions define your best self. Thomas taught me that. And even though you tried to destroy what he built, I won't let you take that lesson from me too. Richard nodded, unable to speak. He mounted his horse, looking back one last time. For what it's worth, he loved you, my brother. He talked about you constantly, about how lucky he was to find someone who matched his strength. I was jealous of that, I think. Jealous that he had something real when all I had was ambition and bitterness. He did love me, Eliza agreed, and I loved him, but he's gone now, and I'm building a new life with new love. That's not a betrayal of his memory. It's honoring everything he taught me about moving forward, even when it's hard. Richard tipped his hat to both of them, then rode away into the rain. They watched until he disappeared, then Caleb turned to Eliza. You didn't have to accept his offer. Yes, I did. Not for him, for me. For us. Eliza looked down at the deed in her hands. This is closure. Real closure. Now we can move forward without looking back. They went inside to find the children waiting anxiously in the parlor, Mrs. Chen hovering nearby with protective concern. When Eliza explained what had happened, that Richard had surrendered everything and left the territory, the tension drained from the room like water from a broken dam. So we're really safe now? Margaret asked. Forever safe? Forever safe, Eliza confirmed. Uncle Richard is gone. The farm is legally ours, and nothing can take this family apart anymore. The celebration that followed was spontaneous and joyful. Mrs. Chen brought out cookies she'd been saving for a special occasion. The children danced around the parlor, their laughter echoing off the walls. Even Caleb, usually so controlled, swept Rose up in his arms and spun her around until she squealed with delight. That night, after the children were finally asleep and the house had settled into quiet darkness, Eliza found herself in the sitting room that connected her bedroom to Caleb's. He was there too, both of them drawn to the same space without planning it. I keep thinking about distance, Eliza said quietly, standing by the window and watching the rain still falling steadily. About how far we've traveled to get here. Not just in miles, but in every other way that matters. Caleb came to stand beside her. It's strange to think that 3 months ago I didn't know you existed, and now I can't imagine my life without you in it. 3 months ago, I was walking a dusty road with 3 starving daughters and no hope. 80 yards down that road I heard you scream, and everything changed. 80 yards, Caleb's voice was contemplative. The distance between worst and best, between ending and beginning. Eliza leaned against him, feeling his solid warmth. Do you believe in fate? In things happening for a reason? I believe in choices. I believe that horse could have fallen anywhere along 100 miles of road, but it fell where you could hear it. You could have kept walking, but you chose to help. I could have sent you away after you'd saved me, but I chose to offer you a place here. Every step after that, every decision we made, led us to this moment. So not fate, just a series of choices that happened to align. Or maybe fate is just what we call the pattern we see when we look back at the choices we've made. Caleb turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Either way, I'm grateful. For the horse falling, for you being there, for every impossible coincidence that brought you into my life. I'm grateful too, even though it was terrifying, even though I fought against it at first. Are you still fighting? Eliza thought about the question honestly. Was she still holding back, still protecting herself against the possibility of loss? Maybe a little. Maybe she always would be, because she knew too well what loving and losing felt like. But the walls she'd built around her heart had crumbled enough that love could get through. No, she said finally. I'm not fighting anymore. I'm choosing, actively, deliberately choosing this life we're building together. Caleb kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. When they broke apart, he took her hand and led her toward his bedroom, not her separate quarters, not the careful distance they'd maintained, but his room, their room, now. Are you sure? He asked at the threshold, giving her one last chance to retreat to safety. I'm sure. Eliza crossed the threshold with him, leaving behind the last vestiges of the practical arrangement they'd started with. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing us. What followed was tender and passionate and real. 2 people who'd found each other in the midst of crisis, discovering that what they'd built was strong enough to last long after the crisis had passed. The weeks that followed brought a settling into their new reality. The rain continued on and off, soaking the land and bringing it back to life. The cattle that had been struggling began to thrive again. The vegetable gardens that Lily and Noah had been nursing exploded with growth, producing more food than the ranch could consume. Eliza sold her farm in Copper Hollow to a young couple just starting out, taking satisfaction in knowing the land Thomas had loved would be cared for properly. The money from the sale went into ranch improvements and expanding operations. She became a full partner in the business, her name appearing on documents alongside Caleb's. The trust fund Richard had established for the girls was invested carefully, ensuring they'd have options when they grew up: education, opportunities, freedom to choose their own paths. Margaret flourished in the ranch school, her quick mind and serious nature making her a favorite of the teacher. Lily's gift with growing things became legendary among the ranch hands, who swore she could make anything bloom with just a touch and a kind word. Rose grew strong and healthy, the bout with brain fever leaving no lasting damage except perhaps a slightly more cautious nature and a deeper appreciation for each day. And Noah transformed from the silent, grieving child into a bright, talkative boy who followed Caleb everywhere, learning about ranching and cattle and what it meant to be part of something bigger than yourself. He still talked about his mother sometimes, still missed her, but the grief no longer consumed him. He'd learned to carry it alongside the joy of his new family rather than letting it crush him. 6 months after the rain broke the drought, Eliza discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mixture of joy and fear. Joy at the possibility of new life, fear at all the things that could go wrong. But Caleb held her through the worry, and Dr. Carter monitored her carefully, and slowly the fear gave way to anticipation. "A boy or a girl?" Lily asked constantly, her hands already planning what plants she'd grow for the baby's room. "We'll love them either way," Eliza would respond, her hand resting on her growing belly. The baby came on a spring morning 8 months later, a boy with Caleb's dark hair and Eliza's determined cry. They named him Thomas Caleb Mercer, honoring the past while celebrating the future. Holding her newborn son while her daughters crowded around to get their first look at their baby brother, Eliza felt a peace she'd thought was lost forever. This wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd chosen, built from the wreckage of what she'd lost and the courage to love again. "He's perfect," Margaret whispered, her finger carefully held by tiny fist. "He's ours," Lily said firmly, as if that settled everything. "Can I hold him?" Rose asked, already reaching out with careful hands. Caleb stood behind Eliza's chair, his hands on her shoulders, watching his expanded family with an expression of wonder. "What are you thinking?" Eliza asked softly. "I'm thinking about 80 yards, about the impossibly small distance between one life and another, about how quickly everything can change when you make the choice to stop walking past the people who need you." Eliza looked down at her son, then at her daughters, then up at the man she loved. "Best 80 yards I ever traveled. Best 80 yards I ever collapsed on," Caleb agreed with a slight smile. Outside, spring rain was falling again, gentler this time, nurturing rather than desperate. The ranch was thriving, the cattle were healthy, and the future stretched ahead full of possibility. Eliza Harper Mercer had walked away from her old life with nothing but 3 hungry daughters and $2. She'd stopped to save a stranger on a dusty road, and that stranger had saved her right back, though neither of them had known it at the time. Now sitting in a house full of love and laughter and new beginnings, Eliza understood what Caleb had meant about distance. The worst day of her life, being thrown out by Richard with nowhere to go, had happened just 80 yards before the best thing that ever happened to her. 80 yards between despair and hope, between ending and beginning, between the woman who kept walking because she had to and the woman who stopped to help because that's who she was. Such a small distance, such an impossible difference. "Mama?" Rose's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Are you crying?" "Happy tears, baby, just happy tears. Because sometimes the story doesn't end when everything falls apart. Sometimes it's just beginning. Sometimes you have to lose everything before you can find what you were really meant to have all along. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, the distance between your worst moment and your best moment is just 80 yards down a Texas road on a merciless summer day." Eliza had walked those 80 yards, and she'd found her way home.